My mother-in-law grinned triumphantly at the 30 guests gathered around the massive dining room table, her smile stretching wide with barely concealed cruelty. "This is my daughter-in-law," she announced, her voice rising effortlessly over the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. "But she is leaving. My son is filing for divorce." I walked in at that exact moment, carrying a perfectly golden roasted turkey, completely and utterly calm. My husband Bradley stood up across the room, puffing out his chest and positioning himself next to his 24-year-old mistress as though he were posing for a magazine cover. I just smiled serenely, reached into my pocket, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and dropped them squarely onto the table with a satisfying thud. "You are absolutely right, Cynthia," I said. "We are divorcing. But he is not the one who filed. I filed 3 days ago. Oh, and Bradley, did you happen to tell your mother that you secretly mortgaged her entire retirement fund to buy your mistress a brand new Porsche? My name is Olivia, and I am 33 years old. If you have ever had a toxic mother-in-law attempt to humiliate you in front of a crowd of wealthy strangers, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear the full story of how I absolutely dismantled my cheating husband and his insufferably snobby family, without raising my voice even once. Let me paint the picture for you properly. It was Thanksgiving evening. We were hosting dinner at a sprawling, architecturally stunning modern mansion nestled in the most affluent suburbs of the city. I say we, but for the past 7 years of my marriage to Bradley, his mother Cynthia had treated the house less like a family home and more like her personal 5-star country club. Cynthia is 60 years old, perpetually draped in designer labels purchased using a family trust fund she never misses an opportunity to brag about. She loves to remind anyone within earshot that her son is a highly successful commercial real estate broker, a titan of industry, in her telling. And me? According to Cynthia, I was simply the frumpy, unremarkable wife who worked from home in comfortable clothes, hunched over a laptop, typing numbers into spreadsheets. Bradley and Cynthia delighted in telling their high society friends that I was nothing more than a low-level data entry clerk, barely scraping by. I never corrected them. Not once. I let them believe with absolute confidence that they were the financial pillars holding the entire family structure together. I let Bradley buy expensive custom suits and strut around pretending to be a titan of the commercial real estate world. I kept my mouth firmly shut when Cynthia paraded around their social circle complaining loudly about my lack of ambition, my lack of style, my lack of drive. I let them have their performance. I had my own plans. That particular night, 30 of Cynthia's closest and wealthiest friends were seated around the massive mahogany dining table, all gleaming jewelry and practiced smiles. I had been in the kitchen for hours, single-handedly preparing an elaborate Thanksgiving feast from scratch. When I finally pushed open the heavy swinging doors and stepped into the dining room, carrying a 20-pound roasted turkey on a heavy, polished silver platter, the room fell suddenly and completely dead silent. Cynthia was already on her feet at the head of the table. She tapped her diamond ring deliberately against her champagne flute. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" She projected her voice with theatrical precision, making absolutely certain every single guest was watching. She lifted one perfectly manicured finger and pointed it directly at me as I stood there in the doorway, holding the heavy, steaming platter. "I want you all to take a very good look at my daughter-in-law, Olivia," she announced with regal authority. "She has been serving us quite well today, which is fitting, because that is honestly about all she is good for. But take a long, hard look, because this will be the very last time she hosts our family holidays." I stood completely still, the warmth radiating from the roasted turkey warming my face, my expression entirely neutral. Beside Cynthia stood my husband Bradley, 35 years old, dressed in a custom suit he absolutely could not afford. Standing entirely too close to him, practically pressed against his arm, was Lexi, his 24-year-old assistant. Lexi was poured into a skin-tight red dress, wearing a smug little smirk, casually sipping from a crystal wine glass as though she had already been handed the deed to the property and was simply waiting for the formalities to conclude. Cynthia smiled brilliantly at the stunned gathering. "My son has finally come to his senses," she declared. "He is filing for divorce from this lazy freeloader. He is moving forward with someone who actually understands and appreciates his ambitious, sophisticated lifestyle. Someone with real class and genuine potential." She gestured grandly and magnanimously toward Lexi, who practically radiated pride on cue. A wave of audible gasps rippled through the dining room. Several of the wealthy guests immediately began whispering behind their hands, eyes cutting toward me with a mixture of theatrical pity and thinly veiled disgust. I glanced down the length of the long table to where Monica sat, my 30-year-old sister-in-law, and found her expression one of genuine, mortified horror at her own mother's public cruelty. Sitting directly beside her was her husband, Terrence, 34 years old, a brilliantly sharp African-American forensic accountant, and, in my honest estimation, the only person in that entire family who possessed even a single ounce of actual moral integrity. Terrence caught my eye across the table and gave me the most imperceptible of nods. He knew exactly what was about to unfold. Bradley puffed out his chest and stepped forward, attempting to inhabit the role of the powerful, ruthless patriarch reclaiming control of his destiny. He fixed me with a look of undiluted contempt. "Put the turkey down, Olivia," he said, his voice low and dismissive. "Take off that cheap apron, pack your bags, and see yourself out. You are embarrassing yourself by just standing there." The tension in the dining room was thick enough to slice with the carving knife sitting beside the platter. Every single person around that table was waiting, holding their collective breath, for me to cry, to scream, to drop the platter and sprint from the room in devastated tears. That is what a victim would do. That is precisely what a helpless, dependent little data entry clerk would do. But I was not a victim. I walked calmly and deliberately to the center of the table, set the heavy silver platter down with a solid, decisive thud, and slowly wiped my hands on a clean towel. Then I reached behind my neck and untied the apron strings. Cynthia's sneer deepened, her voice dripping with barely contained venom. "Yes, take it off," she hissed. "Take off that cheap apron, you pathetic little clerk. You do not belong in this world. You never did. And everyone here has always known it." I let the apron fall to the floor at my feet. Underneath, I was not wearing some forgettable home outfit. I was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue silk blouse and sleek tailored slacks, an ensemble that cost considerably more than Bradley's entire custom suit wardrobe combined. I reached into the deep front pocket of the discarded apron, produced a thick, organized stack of legal documents, and slapped them with deliberate force onto the mahogany surface, directly beside the gravy boat. "You are absolutely right, Cynthia," I said, my voice carrying clearly and steadily across the completely silent room. "Bradley and I are getting a divorce." I paused just a beat for effect. "But he is not the one who filed. I filed 3 days ago." Bradley's smug, self-satisfied expression faltered instantly, crumpling at the edges. Lexi stopped smiling. Her fingers tightened visibly around the stem of her wineglass. I leaned forward, resting both hands firmly on the edge of the table, and locked eyes directly with my mother-in-law. "And, since we are airing all the family's dirty secrets tonight in front of your lovely friends, Cynthia, I have a quick question for you. Did your highly successful son happen to mention that he secretly mortgaged your sacred retirement fund last month?" I let the question hang in the air like smoke. The color drained completely and instantly from Cynthia's face. She turned slowly toward Bradley, who in turn looked as though he was seriously considering being physically ill right there on the Persian rug. I shifted my gaze to Lexi, offering her a smile that was simultaneously sweet and razor-sharp. "He needed the cash," I explained pleasantly, my voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the silent room. "He needed the cash specifically to purchase the shiny new Porsche currently parked in the driveway outside." I straightened up and lifted my champagne glass slightly. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." The silence detonated. Bradley's face flooded a violent, mottled shade of crimson. He lunged forward and snatched the stack of legal documents from the table, tearing through the pages with frantic, desperate hands, his eyes darting across the text as though searching for a lie he would never find. He crumpled the top page in his white-knuckled fist and slammed both hands down hard on the mahogany. "How dare you?" he roared, the veins in his neck bulging prominently. "You manipulative, lying fraud. You think you can waltz into my family's home, destroy our Thanksgiving dinner, and just make up these insane, delusional stories?" Lexi tightened her grip on Bradley's arm, her perfectly manicured nails biting into the fabric of his expensive jacket. She leaned her head against his shoulder and glared at me with undisguised contempt. "You heard him," she snapped, her voice shrill and grating. "You are just a jealous, bitter woman who cannot handle the fact that he upgraded. Grab your cheap clothes and get out of his house." The wealthy guests surrounding the table erupted into overlapping whispers, their voices weaving together into a toxic chorus of social judgment. I could hear the sneers from Cynthia's country club circle filtering through the room. "So ungrateful," one woman muttered from behind her wine glass. "Bradley gave her a beautiful, privileged life, and this is how the data entry clerk repays him." An older man across the table scoffed audibly. They looked at me the way people look at a stray dog that has wandered uninvited into a palace and left muddy prints on the priceless Persian rugs. Cynthia, visibly gathering herself after the initial shock, straightened her spine and attempted to reassemble her regal composure. She pointed one trembling finger toward the heavy oak front doors. "You are a delusional, vindictive little girl," she spat, her voice shaking with what I recognized as largely manufactured rage. "My son provides everything for you. He put this roof over your ungrateful head. Now get out of his house before I have you physically removed and thrown onto the street." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not even blink. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, entirely genuine laugh, warm and full and unself-conscious, that echoed off the soaring ceilings and made the crystal chandeliers seem to tremble. The sheer, staggering audacity of their collective arrogance was, in that moment, genuinely intoxicating. Bradley stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. "What exactly is so funny? You have completely lost your mind." I stopped laughing, reached into the pocket of my silk slacks, produced a small black electronic remote control, and held it up for the entire room to see clearly. Then I pressed the main button. From outside came a loud, heavy mechanical clank as the massive iron security gates at the far end of the driveway locked shut with absolute finality. "Your house, Bradley?" I asked, my tone dropping to something quiet and deadly and completely devoid of warmth. "Your family's house? Tell me, in the 7 years we have been married, did you ever once sit down and actually read the closing documents for this property? Or were you perpetually too busy admiring your own reflection and crafting your commercial real estate titan persona?" Bradley's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He stared at the remote in my hand as though it were a grenade. "Allow me to educate you, since your reading comprehension has always been somewhat lacking," I said, taking one slow, measured step toward him. "This $2 million estate is owned by Horizon LLC. Horizon LLC is a corporate entity that was established and fully operational 3 full years before I ever made the considerable mistake of marrying you, and I am its sole owner, its founder, and its chief executive officer. The whispering among the guests stopped entirely. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. You do not own a single brick of this mansion, Bradley, I continued, my voice as steady and sharp as a surgical instrument. You have never owned it. You have been a freeloading tenant living entirely rent-free under my roof, posing as a wealthy, generous provider to impress your shallow friends and your impressionable little assistant. That is impossible, Bradley stammered, taking an involuntary step backward, the color evacuating his face in real time. I pay the utility bills. I handle the landscaping. You pay the light bill, Bradley, I corrected him evenly, stepping deliberately into his personal space. I carry the substantial mortgage. I pay the property taxes. I pay the premium insurance. I fund every single one of those expenses using the salary from the company you have spent 7 years openly mocking and dismissing. I allowed you to play the role of the strong, successful breadwinner because your fragile ego demanded that performance from me. But make no mistake, this is my property, every square foot of it. I turned to face Lexi. The smug smirk had evaporated entirely from her face, replaced by an expression of pale, dawning terror. She looked frantically between me and Bradley, the sudden, horrible realization settling over her that the wealthy, established man she believed she had cleverly secured for herself was, in reality, a broke, cheating fraud, drowning quietly in debt he had been concealing for years. And as for you, Cynthia, I said, pivoting to face my mother-in-law with the same composed, unhurried energy. You have spent years treating my home as your personal luxury resort. You drank my finest wine without hesitation. You paraded your social circle through my hallways as though you owned the address. And in the same breath, you called me a freeloader. I held her gaze. The truth, the simple, documented, irrefutable truth, is that you and your son are the parasites. I looked around at the stunned, speechless faces of all 30 guests. You all have exactly 15 minutes to collect your coats and vacate my property. After that, anyone still standing inside these walls will be formally charged with criminal trespassing. Cynthia gasped theatrically, both hands flying to her diamond necklace. You cannot do this. You are bluffing. I will call the police this instant and have you arrested for this outrageous harassment. I allowed myself a slow, cold smile. I already did. Right on cue, the shrill, piercing wail of police sirens split the cold November night. Flashing red and blue lights swept through the large dining room windows, painting Bradley's horrified face in alternating, relentless color. I had timed the call with precision, reporting a hostile domestic disturbance and unwanted trespassers at my exact address. The sirens grew louder, closer, and then 2 patrol cruisers rolled up to meet the locked iron gates at the end of the drive. Cynthia's eyes rolled dramatically back in her head. She let out a high-pitched, piercing shriek, clutched her chest with both trembling hands, and collapsed with theatrical perfection onto the expensive dining room rug in an entirely staged, expertly executed swoon. The heavy oak front doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the grand foyer, their presence immediately commanding the room. Cynthia miraculously recovered from her fainting spell at precisely the moment she registered that not a single person was rushing to her assistance. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive silk dress crumpling beneath her, and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger in my direction. "Arrest her this instant!" she shrieked, her voice reverberating off the marble floors. "She is threatening us inside our own home. She is completely and dangerously unhinged." The lead officer ignored her theatrics entirely. He walked directly and purposefully toward me. "Ma'am, we received a call regarding a hostile domestic disturbance and unwanted trespassers at this location. Is everything all right here?" I walked calmly to the antique console table against the wall, lifted a pristine manila folder I had placed there earlier in the day, and handed it to the officer without a word of unnecessary drama. "I am perfectly fine, officer. I am the sole legal property owner of this residence. Enclosed, you will find the certified deed, the LLC registration documents matching my identification, and my state-issued driver's license. The gentleman currently screaming in the dining room is my soon-to-be ex-husband. The young woman in the red dress is his mistress. I am formally requesting that they, along with all remaining guests, be removed from my property immediately." Bradley puffed out his chest and stepped aggressively into the officer's personal space, deploying the full authority of his commercial real estate broker voice in a transparent attempt to assert dominance over the situation. "Officer, be reasonable about this. This is marital property. She cannot simply eject me from my own home on Thanksgiving over a marital disagreement. You cannot legally force a man out of his own house." The officer reviewed the documents carefully, checking the official watermarks, then looked up at Bradley with complete and total indifference. "Sir, your name does not appear anywhere on this deed. The legal homeowner has formally and explicitly revoked her permission for you to be present on these premises. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your immediate personal belongings and exit the property voluntarily, or you will be placed in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespassing." Lexi let out a high, strangled gasp. The full weight of reality crashed down on her all at once. She seized her designer purse from the back of her chair, her high heels clicking in rapid, frantic percussion against the hardwood floor as she sprinted for the front door, abandoning Bradley entirely, without so much as a backward glance. Cynthia shrieked once more, her face a portrait of absolute horror, as her assembled country club friends practically trampled one another in their collective desperation to escape the scene unfolding around them. They poured out to their luxury cars in a whispering, horrified flood, systematically dismantling the carefully constructed social reputation Cynthia had spent decades cultivating with every single panicked footstep across my driveway. Bradley fixed me with a look of volcanic fury, his fists shaking visibly at his sides. "You are going to pay for this, Olivia. I will take everything you have." The officers escorted him out firmly by the elbow, practically towing Cynthia behind him as she wailed in operatic grief about her ruined reputation and her mortified social standing. The heavy iron gates slammed shut behind the last departing car. I stood alone in the dining room, surveying the untouched roasted turkey and the half-empty crystal champagne flutes abandoned around the massive table. I exhaled a long, slow, steady breath and felt, truly felt, for the first time in years, the crushing, suffocating weight of a 7-year charade lift entirely off my shoulders. I reached for a stack of dirty porcelain plates, when the sound of the front door opening behind me made me go still. I turned, expecting Bradley to have somehow doubled back past the officers. Instead, Terrence walked quietly into the foyer. He pulled the heavy door closed gently behind him and crossed directly to the mahogany bar cart in the corner. He lifted a crystal decanter and poured 2 generous measures of neat bourbon into 2 heavy glasses. He walked to where I stood and extended 1 glass toward me without ceremony. I took it, genuinely surprised by his quiet return. "Where is Monica?" I asked, bringing the glass to my lips. The warm burn of the bourbon anchored me. "She is waiting in the car," Terrence replied, his deep, measured voice perfectly steady. "She is completely on your side, Olivia. She wants you to know that without question. She simply could not bear to watch her mother have a complete psychological breakdown on the front lawn." He paused. "But I needed to come back inside. There is something I have been holding on to for 3 years that you deserve to hear directly from me." Terrence, always the meticulous and perceptive forensic accountant, leaned back against the edge of the dining table. He swirled his bourbon slowly and regarded me with an expression of genuine, deep respect. "I knew you were not a data entry clerk 3 years ago," he said. "I stumbled across your tax returns accidentally when Bradley asked me to help him apply for a business loan he had absolutely zero chance of qualifying for." I never said a word. But I saw everything. I raised an eyebrow and slowly swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "You knew about Horizon LLC?" "I knew everything," Terrence said, a slow, quiet smile spreading across his face. "I saw the corporate filings. I saw the capital gains figures. I saw the medical billing software company valuations. I knew you were working 18-hour days building a genuine empire while Bradley was out on the golf course, pretending to close deals that never materialized. I knew Bradley was a comprehensive fraud, running up maximum credit lines across multiple accounts while you quietly and entirely funded his delusional, performance-based lifestyle." He paused. "What I never understood was why you allowed them to treat you the way they did for as long as you did." I looked down into my glass, watching the refracted chandelier light play across the surface of the bourbon. "I loved him once," I said, my voice quieter now. "I genuinely believed that if I stayed patient, if I let him feel like the provider, like the man in charge, he might eventually grow into being a real partner, a real person worth standing beside." I shook my head slightly. And then I found the bank statements for Lexi's Porsche, and I understood finally that I was not a wife. I was an ATM machine, financing his infidelity and his ego in equal measure. Terrence nodded, his expression settling into something grave and serious. "You played tonight absolutely perfectly. But brace yourself, Olivia. Bradley is broke, he is desperate, and he is cornered. Men like him do not simply accept defeat and disappear. He is going to attempt to burn everything you have built to the ground in order to get his hands on your money." As though the universe itself had been listening to Terrence's warning and had decided to confirm it immediately, my phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. The screen lit up with a barrage of relentless, overlapping notifications. 5 missed calls from my corporate attorney, and directly below that, an email flagged as high importance from one of the most notoriously aggressive, cutthroat divorce attorneys in the state, a lawyer specifically known for dragging high-net-worth cases through the courts until the opposing party was financially and emotionally exhausted. I opened the email and scanned the dense, aggressive legal language rapidly. My grip tightened incrementally on the phone. "What is it?" Terrence asked, reading the shift in my posture immediately. "Bradley did not waste a single hour," I said, my voice hardening to ice. "He used the joint credit card he apparently believes is still active to retain a shark. His lawyer has already filed an emergency motion with the court. They are demanding an immediate, comprehensive freeze on all of my personal accounts and all business accounts." Terrence's expression darkened. He set his glass down. "On what possible grounds?" "He is claiming that Horizon LLC and my medical billing software company constitute marital property." I read aloud, my eyes moving rapidly across the screen. "He is officially pursuing 50% of my company shares, full ownership of the house, and $5 million in spousal support. His stated basis is that he sacrificed his own career opportunities to support my business ventures." I looked up from the phone. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. Bradley actually believed he could seize the company I had built through years of relentless, solitary effort. He believed he could weaponize the legal system against me and bleed my life's work dry to fund himself and his mistress indefinitely. He believed he had me cornered with no viable exit. I looked across at Terrence. A slow, dangerous smile curved my lips. "Let him try." The crisp, clean morning air of downtown hit my face the moment I stepped out of my car. It was precisely 7 a.m., and I had arrived at the office ready to begin systematically dismantling every legal maneuver Bradley's attorney had filed overnight. Horizon Medical Billing Solutions occupied a sleek, architecturally impressive three-story glass building positioned at the heart of the financial district. I owned the building outright, a fact that would become unavoidably, painfully apparent to my soon-to-be ex-husband in very short order. It was exactly 9 a.m. when the disruption erupted in the ground floor lobby. I was mid-review of the emergency injunction Bradley's shark had filed when my desk phone buzzed. David, my head of building security, a former Marine with an economy of words and an absolute command of any room he occupied, spoke with the crisp, professional restraint of someone managing a situation they had entirely under control. "Ma'am, we have a developing situation in the main lobby. A man identifying himself as your husband is causing a significant disturbance. He is demanding to speak directly with the chief executive officer and is refusing all requests to leave the premises." I smiled, closed my laptop, and stood up. "Keep him contained, David. I will be right down." I smoothed the lapels of my tailored Tom Ford suit, checked my reflection once in the glass partition, and headed for the elevator. For 7 complete years, Bradley had only ever seen me in comfortable home clothes, sweatpants, oversized sweaters, hair piled into a careless bun, typing away industriously at the kitchen island while he sailed past, barely registering my presence. He had built an unshakable mental image of me as a low-level clerk surviving on a modest wage. He had clearly used my legal name and the LLC documents from the previous night to track down the corporate address. I could only imagine what had registered on his face when his GPS navigation guided him not to a modest office suite in some unremarkable strip mall, but directly to a prime, prestigious piece of commercial real estate in the heart of the financial district. The VIP elevator descended silently to the ground floor. When the polished steel doors slid open, the lobby scene was, even by my standards, nothing short of cinematic. Bradley was scarlet-faced and erupting, screaming at my visibly shaken receptionist from the other side of the marble front desk. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he bellowed, slamming his open palm down against the polished surface. "I am a top-tier commercial real estate broker. I know exactly how these flimsy little shell companies operate. You go tell whoever is running this operation to bring my wife out here immediately. She is stealing my assets, and I am not leaving this building until I receive what is legally mine." He gestured wildly, completely oblivious to the sophisticated, meticulously curated surroundings pressing in on him from every direction. The lobby walls were lined with significant modern art pieces, flanked by towering indoor plants, with a massive live digital display showcasing our extensive network of healthcare partners rotating in the background. This was not a cheap operation. This was a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and it showed in every square inch of the space. 2 of my security personnel moved to intercept him, their expressions professionally stern. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and step away from the desk immediately," David instructed, his tone brooking absolutely no negotiation. Bradley scoffed, squaring his shoulders. "I am going nowhere. Get your CEO down here this instant. I demand to speak with the person in charge." "You are speaking to her." My voice cut through the chaos of the lobby like a blade through silk. Bradley spun around. His mouth fell open. His eyes went wide with a shock so complete and total it was almost artistic. I stepped out of the elevator bay, my designer heels connecting with the polished marble in sharp, even strikes. The security guard stepped back immediately, offering a respectful nod. My receptionist exhaled visibly with relief. Bradley looked from her, to the guards, and then back to me. He took in the impeccable suit, the immaculate presence, the quiet and unmistakable authority I occupied in that space as naturally as breathing. He looked upward at the 3 stories of glass and steel enclosing us. The realization washed across his face in slow, devastating increments. "This is a joke," Bradley stammered, his pointing finger trembling. "You do not work here. You enter numbers into spreadsheets. You do not even own a business suit." I walked toward him at a measured pace, stopping a few deliberate feet away. I crossed my arms and regarded him with a calm, unhurried, profound sense of pity. "You are a genuinely terrible commercial real estate broker, Bradley. You are standing inside a building independently valued at $12 million, a building that houses the medical billing software company I personally founded 7 years ago. The same company that processes transactions for 40 major hospital systems across the country." I held his gaze without blinking. "I am not simply the CEO, I am the sole shareholder." Bradley stumbled backward as though struck. The security guards caught his shoulders and guided him down into one of the velvet guest chairs. He did not resist. He simply sat there, staring up at me, his breathing shallow and irregular. 7 years of condescending remarks, of casual financial manipulation, of performative grandeur. All of it dissolved in the span of 30 silent seconds. He had spent the entirety of our marriage conducting himself like a king, entirely blind to the inescapable fact that he had been living under the same roof as an emperor. I had anticipated that the sheer scale of the humiliation would break him, that he would absorb the reality of it, hang his head, and walk quietly out through the glass doors in the direction of whatever came next. I had underestimated the catastrophic depth of his toxic greed. The shock on his face transmuted slowly, visibly, into something uglier. A twisted, calculating smirk began to form at the corners of his mouth. He shook off the security guards, leaned forward in the velvet chair, and looked up at me with eyes that gleamed with sickening, frantic calculation. "You know what, Olivia?" he said, his voice recovering its oily, deliberate cadence. "This is actually perfect. Better, honestly, than I even imagined." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you experiencing a psychotic episode in my lobby right now?" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound entirely devoid of warmth. "My attorney filed the paperwork this morning. Since you constructed this entire magnificent empire during the period of our legal marriage, every asset attached to it qualifies as marital property. I do not care how many hospital systems you service. I do not care if your name is on the deed to this building. I am going to claim 50% of this company, 50% of your profits, 50% of your assets. 50% of everything you have ever built with your own hands. You have just guaranteed my early and extremely comfortable retirement." He stood up, straightening his tie with the practiced smugness of a man who believed he had just outmaneuvered a grandmaster. "I will see you in court, partner." Before I could respond to the threat, my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. A message from Terrence, a screenshot captioned, "You need to see this immediately. Lexi is going nuclear." I opened the image. It was a public Facebook post from Lexi's personal account, unrestricted, unfiltered, and already accumulating hundreds of shares. She had posted a photograph of her forearm wrapped in a bandage alongside a lengthy, tearful written statement. "I can no longer stay silent. The woman my boyfriend is divorcing is a monster. She is a violent, abusive narcissist who physically attacked me in my own home last night. She threw us out into the freezing cold because she is a miserable, bitter woman who cannot stand to see us happy. And expecting a child. Please share this widely so the world knows the truth about this vicious CEO." She had tagged my company's official business page directly. She was making a deliberate, calculated attempt to shatter my professional reputation and tank my company's market valuation before the divorce proceedings had progressed beyond their first morning. Bradley watched my face with visible, hungry satisfaction, his smirk widening. "Whatever you are reading right now, I can absolutely guarantee it is only the beginning. We are going to bleed you completely dry, Olivia. I looked up from the phone. I held his gaze. I did not scream. I did not panic. I did not move a single unnecessary muscle. I just smiled. A slow, terrifying, glacially calm smile that made Bradley take an instinctive step backward toward the exit. David, I said, keeping my eyes fixed on Bradley without blinking. Please escort this man off my property. If he sets foot on this pavement again without prior written authorization, have him arrested immediately. Bradley turned and marched out through the glass doors with his chest out and his chin up, believing in his bones that he had just fired the opening salvo of a war he was going to win. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking directly into a legal slaughterhouse. He had forgotten, entirely, catastrophically, the one document sitting in my files that was about to transform his carefully constructed fantasy of financial revenge into a complete and irreversible nightmare. The mahogany conference table felt like a battlefield the moment I took my seat. I sat perfectly composed beside my attorney, a seasoned, unflappable litigator with decades of combined corporate and family law experience and a track record that spoke for itself. Across the polished wood sat Bradley, practically vibrating with poorly contained arrogance, dressed in yet another expensive suit that I was reasonably certain he had purchased on the credit card I had already formally reported as stolen. Beside him sat his chosen weapon, a lawyer notorious throughout the legal community for dragging high-net-worth divorce cases out until the opposing party was financially depleted and psychologically broken. Bradley's attorney slid a thick, organized stack of papers across the surface of the table with the practiced smoothness of a man who had performed this exact motion hundreds of times. My client is prepared to be entirely reasonable, the lawyer began, his voice coated in false, silken diplomacy. He had no idea what was waiting for him on our side of the table. Neither did Bradley. But they were both about to find out. Since the medical billing software company and the commercial real estate it occupies were both acquired and substantially grown during the course of the marriage, they are unequivocally and entirely marital assets. The lawyer continued, his voice smooth and unhurried. We are demanding a 50% division of all corporate shares, the immediate transfer of half of all liquid assets, and $5 million in spousal support. Sufficient to maintain the standard of living my client has become accustomed to over the duration of this marriage. Bradley leaned back in his plush leather chair and crossed his arms with the triumphant, self-satisfied smirk of a man who genuinely believed he had already won. He looked at me the way a hunter looks at a deer with its leg caught in a trap, with contemptuous, almost bored pity. "You should just sign it, Olivia," Bradley said, his voice coated in a thin veneer of manufactured sympathy. "You hid this massive fortune from me for years. The judge is going to tear you apart for financial deception. And after Lexi's post about your abusive behavior goes properly viral, your company valuation is going to crater anyway. Take the deal now, before you lose absolutely everything." I did not look at the papers. I looked at my attorney and gave him a single, quiet nod. My attorney calmly pushed Bradley's stack of demands to the side, reached into his leather briefcase with the unhurried confidence of a man holding a royal flush, and produced a single crisp, precisely folded document. He placed it gently and deliberately in the exact center of the table. "I am afraid your client is suffering from a rather severe case of selective amnesia," my attorney said pleasantly, nudging the document across the polished wood toward Bradley's lawyer. "This is the prenuptial agreement, signed by both parties 3 months prior to the wedding ceremony." Bradley rolled his eyes theatrically and released a loud, obnoxious laugh that filled the conference room. "A prenup? Are you genuinely serious right now? I signed that piece of garbage when I thought she was just a broke little data entry clerk living paycheck to paycheck. Any judge with half a brain will throw that out in 5 seconds flat, because she deliberately concealed her true net worth at the time of signing." My attorney smiled. It was the particular smile of a predator who has been patiently waiting for exactly this moment. Actually, full and complete financial disclosure was provided in the attached appendix, which your client evidently never bothered to read. But far more relevantly, we are formally invoking Section 4, Paragraph 2, the Infidelity Clause. Bradley's attorney's expression shifted instantly. He snatched the document and began scanning the highlighted passages, his eyes moving rapidly across the text. The clause was airtight, ironclad, unambiguous, and expertly drafted. It stated clearly and without equivocation that if either party engaged in an extramarital affair, they immediately and irrevocably forfeited any and all rights to marital assets, business holdings, real estate, and spousal support of any kind. They would walk away from the marriage with precisely what they had brought into it. In Bradley's case, that was absolutely nothing. Bradley slammed his open palm down on the mahogany table, his face flooding with color. This is a desperate bluff, and everyone in this room knows it. You have zero proof of anything. I have been a completely devoted husband throughout this marriage. Lexi is my professional assistant. Her presence at the house was strictly work-related, and any insinuation of an affair is pure, actionable defamation. You cannot prove a single thing, Olivia. You are simply trying to protect your precious money. I opened the sleek silver laptop positioned in front of me and turned the screen deliberately to face Bradley and his attorney. When you live in a house owned by a corporate entity that processes sensitive, federally regulated medical billing data, Bradley, I said, my voice entirely flat and devoid of any emotion whatsoever. You are required to comply with strict internal security protocols. That includes surveillance cameras installed in all primary living areas. I paused. Cameras you never once noticed because you were far too preoccupied admiring yourself in the mirrors. I pressed play. High-definition, full-color security footage filled the screen. The timestamp displayed in the lower corner was crystal clear. 3 weeks prior, a Tuesday afternoon. The footage showed Bradley and Lexi entering my living room together. It showed everything that followed in explicit and entirely undeniable detail, right there on my custom Italian leather sofa. The audio was immaculate, capturing not only the scene itself, but Bradley's voice making specific contemptuous comments about how foolish his wife was, while simultaneously lavishing affection on his mistress. The color left Bradley's face so completely and so rapidly that he looked, for a moment, like a man who had already been pronounced dead. His mouth opened and closed in silence. He stared at the screen with the hollow, vacant expression of someone watching their entire, carefully constructed world collapse in real time. His attorney, however, did not freeze. The lawyer snapped his pen down onto the table, his face twisting with undisguised, incandescent professional fury. He turned to Bradley, his voice dropping to a tight, controlled hiss. You lied to me. You sat across from me in my office, looked me directly in the eye, and swore on your life that there was no infidelity and no prenuptial agreement in existence. You have exposed my firm to serious legal sanctions by inducing me to file fraudulent motions constructed entirely on your deliberate lies. The attorney rose abruptly from his chair and began forcing his documents back into his briefcase with sharp, aggressive movements that made the table vibrate. We are finished here. I am withdrawing as your counsel. Effective this moment. Do not call my office. Do not send an email. You will receive a detailed invoice for my wasted time before the close of business today. Bradley lunged forward, grabbing desperately at the lawyer's sleeve. Wait, you cannot just abandon me here. We can figure this out together. We can challenge the video. We can argue chain of custody. We can... The lawyer wrenched his arm away as though the physical contact itself was contaminating. Challenge a time-stamped high-definition security recording with full audio captured by a federally compliant corporate system. You are entirely on your own. Have a very nice life. The heavy conference room door slammed shut behind him. Bradley sat completely alone on his side of the wide mahogany table, in a chair that now felt like a dock in a courtroom. I closed my laptop with a soft, definitive click. The sound carried across the silence of the room like a gavel. You walked in here this morning demanding $5 million and half my company, I said, holding his gaze across the empty table. According to the document you signed with your own hand, you received nothing. No house, no money, no spousal support, no shares. You walk away from this marriage with the exact quantity of dignity you carried into this room. I let the silence hold for a beat. Which is 0. Bradley stared at the polished surface of the mahogany table. He had no attorney, no leverage, no strategy, and no money. After a long, hollow moment, he rose slowly from his chair, his shoulders caved inward with the weight of complete and total defeat, and walked out of the conference room empty-handed, leaving behind nothing but the shattered remnants of a billionaire fantasy he had never once earned. Bradley walking out of that conference room without a single asset to his name was a decisive legal victory. But the war, I knew with absolute certainty, was nowhere near finished. Cynthia, realizing with cold fury that her golden child had been completely severed from my finances, shifted into a different and far more dangerous mode of attack. If she could not extract my money through the court system, she was going to methodically dismantle my reputation instead. She had lost access to lawyers, so she weaponized the only currency she had left, her social standing. I spent the next 2 weeks essentially living inside my corner office. 18-hour workdays became my new baseline. I consumed black espresso by the pot, pacing the length of my glass-walled boardroom, firing off emails in rapid succession, convening emergency sessions with my public relations team, and deploying every resource at my disposal to contain the blazing, spreading inferno that Cynthia had deliberately ignited. Cynthia had converted her platinum membership at the Oakwood Country Club into a full operational command center. She held court in the club's extravagant dining room every single afternoon without exception, sipping expensive martinis, playing the role of the devastated, long-suffering mother with practiced theatrical precision, and spinning an elaborately fabricated narrative to anyone wealthy and influential enough to be worth her time. According to Cynthia's version of events, I was a master manipulator and a corporate fraud who had secretly funneled Bradley's hard-earned real estate commissions into hidden offshore accounts in order to quietly finance my tech startup. She cast her son as the devoted, trusting, loving husband who had been financially gutted and emotionally destroyed by a calculating sociopath. Lexi, eager to cement her position in Cynthia's social orbit and secure whatever remained of the lifestyle she had been promised, enthusiastically amplified every lie. She continued sharing her elaborately staged victim posts across her social media platforms, which Cynthia's network of wealthy friends eagerly reposted and circulated through their own extensive social circles. Together, they were constructing a perfectly engineered, deeply toxic storm of misinformation. In the medical billing software industry, trust, transparency, and rigorous regulatory compliance are not optional features. They are the entire foundation on which the business stands. You cannot service 40 major hospital systems and process billions of dollars in medical transactions if there is even the faintest whisper of financial impropriety attached to your name. Cynthia understood this with surgical precision. She was not gossiping. She was conducting a targeted, deliberate assault on the structural integrity of Horizon Medical Billing Solutions. The damage began to manifest with alarming speed. It started as hushed whispers at society galas. Within days, the panic had seeped directly into my boardroom. Two of my early-stage angel investors requested urgent, unscheduled virtual meetings. Older, conservative men who moved in the exact same elite social circles as my mother-in-law. When their faces appeared on my monitor, neither of them looked remotely friendly. They expressed grave, fundamental concerns about the stability of my leadership and the integrity of my financial practices. One of them, a man who had backed me with significant capital 3 years prior, issued a blunt, barely veiled threat to pull his funding entirely. He cited a morality clause embedded in our original investment contract and demanded an immediate buyout of his shares, claiming he could not risk the potential fallout from a federal embezzlement investigation, a federal investigation that existed solely in the imagination of Cynthia's country club. I sat at my desk afterward, pressing my fingertips against my temples until they ached. I had spent 7 years constructing an immaculate, unblemished corporate record. I had sacrificed sleep, health, youth, and countless personal relationships to build a genuinely flawless enterprise from the ground up. And this bitter, profoundly narcissistic woman was attempting to reduce it to rubble using nothing more powerful than carefully directed gossip over afternoon martinis. I deployed my crisis management team to draft a precise, forceful press release, formally denying all allegations. But sitting alone in my office at midnight, staring at the corporate statement on my screen, I understood the fundamental truth. Fighting elite social rumors with sterile corporate language was a war of attrition I would eventually lose. I did not need to issue statements. I needed to cut the head off the snake. Completely and permanently. I needed leverage against Cynthia that was so catastrophic, so utterly radioactive, that the mere threat of its deployment would force her to shut her mouth and retreat permanently from the field. Then, as I was mapping my next strategic move, my private cell phone vibrated sharply against the desk surface. An encrypted text message from Terrence. Short, blunt. Entirely out of character for the most methodical, measured man I knew. Drop everything you are doing right now. Meet me at the Rusty Spoon coffee shop on the edge of the industrial district in 20 minutes. Come completely alone. Have your security detail wait down the block. Tell no one where you are going. I grabbed my cashmere coat and moved. The Rusty Spoon was a small, dimly lit establishment tucked at the far end of a grimy alley in the industrial district. Miles geographically, and several universes socially from the gleaming financial district and the manicured, hedge-lined suburbs where Cynthia held court. It was the absolute last place anyone from her social circle would ever willingly set foot. I pushed open the creaking wooden door. A small bell chimed softly overhead. I spotted Terrence immediately, hunched over a steaming mug of black coffee in a dark back booth, his broad shoulders folded inward, wearing a plain gray hoodie that made him look nothing at all like the polished forensic accountant I knew him to be. I slid into the vinyl booth across from him. Terrence did not smile or exchange pleasantries. He scanned the near-empty cafe methodically, checking every window, confirming that no one was paying us any attention. Then he reached beneath the table and hoisted a massive leather briefcase up onto the sticky surface with a thud heavy enough to rattle both coffee cups. He unclasped the metal locks with 2 sharp snaps and opened it to reveal hundreds of pages of meticulously highlighted financial documents, bank statements, ledger printouts, property deeds, and loan origination records organized in thick, color-coded folders. He looked at me with an expression of complete gravity. "You have been playing defense for 2 solid weeks, Olivia," he said, his voice low and intense beneath the ambient hiss of the espresso machine. "It is time to go on total, uncompromising offense." He pushed the mountain of documents across the table toward me. "You need to understand exactly how Cynthia has been funding her country club lifestyle all these years, because what is inside these folders is going to fundamentally alter your understanding of everything." I stared at the paperwork spilling across the table. I reached for the top folder and pulled it toward me. As a CEO who navigates complex financial structures on a daily basis, I am fluent in balance sheets and corporate ledgers. But what I was looking at defied rational logic. Terrence leaned back against the vinyl booth, arms crossed, watching my expression transition from focused confusion to raw, undiluted shock. "You see it now," he said quietly. "For 7 years, Cynthia has strutted through that country club performing American royalty. She references the Sacred Family Trust Fund the way other people reference breathing. She positions herself as the embodiment of generations of accumulated, unassailable wealth." He paused. "Look at the withdrawal column." I traced my finger slowly down the page. The numbers were catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of dollars bleeding out of the accounts with relentless consistency, year after year. Designer clothing, international luxury vacations, country club membership fees, and massive, direct cash transfers to Bradley, funding the fictional real estate broker lifestyle he performed for anyone willing to watch. "The family trust fund is completely empty," I said, my voice barely audible above the cafe noise. "The closing balance on this statement, this is from 5 years ago, is literally zero. She has been effectively bankrupt for 5 years." Terrence nodded with the grim, bone-tired expression of a man who has known a terrible thing for a very long time. "She drained every account maintaining the illusion. When the trust fund hit zero, they migrated to high-interest credit cards and predatory personal loans. But even that runway had a ceiling. Their burn rate was simply too extreme to sustain. They needed substantial, ongoing capital to keep the performance going." I looked up at him. "Then how has she maintained the platinum membership? How is she still hosting charity galas? Where is the actual cash coming from?" Terrence reached into the briefcase and produced a single thick manila envelope. He set it in the center of the table and tapped it once with his index finger. "This," he said, "is the centerpiece of their fraud." I opened the envelope and drew out the deed and loan origination documents. It was the historic commercial building in the heart of downtown, the grand neoclassical property that had served as the crown jewel venue for the elite society events Cynthia had built her identity around hosting. It was the last genuinely valuable asset her family possessed. "She took out a substantial commercial mortgage against the building 4 years ago," Terrence explained. "Millions of dollars pulled directly from the property equity. She and Bradley burned through every single cent of that loan, maintaining their fabricated lifestyle. Cars, parties, memberships, and silence." He stopped. "But commercial mortgages demand significant monthly payments. And since neither Cynthia nor Bradley has generated actual earned income in years, they have defaulted." I turned to the final document in the folder. My breath caught. It was an official notice from the largest commercial bank in the state. The bold black type across the header was devastating in its simplicity. "Pre-foreclosure. They are 90 days past due," Terrence confirmed, his eyes holding mine steadily. "The bank has formally initiated the pre-foreclosure process. The grace period has expired. In exactly 3 weeks, that historic building is going to be seized and placed at public auction. Cynthia is about to lose the last piece of social leverage she possesses. The moment that auction listing goes public, everyone in this city will understand that she has been a fraud all along." I sat back in the booth and let the full, staggering magnitude of their hypocrisy settle over me. Cynthia was seated at the Oakwood Country Club right now, this very moment, sipping her martini and methodically telling anyone with influence that I was a corporate embezzler who had stolen from her son. She was orchestrating a coordinated campaign to destroy my medical billing company by circulating accusations that I had stolen money. Meanwhile, she was drowning in toxic, unserviceable debt, concealing a catastrophic bankruptcy, and was less than 3 weeks away from having her family's most prized possession seized by a bank. "She is projecting," I said, a slow, dangerous smile forming without my permission. She is attacking my reputation because she knows with absolute certainty that her own is moments from imploding. She needed a scapegoat. She needed Bradley to successfully seize half my company in the divorce so they could use my money to pay off the bank and quietly save her building. I looked at Terrence. I was their lottery ticket. You were, he confirmed, and you cut them off entirely. Now they are completely, irreversibly trapped. I gathered the documents with steady hands and returned them to their folders. I had entered this grimy coffee shop feeling like a woman being slowly backed into a corner. I was walking out holding the master key to Cynthia's complete and total destruction. Cynthia wanted to play a high-stakes game of reputation and old money. I was going to show her, in precise and clinical detail, what genuine financial power actually looked like. "Thank you, Terrence," I said, sliding the heavy briefcase across to my side of the table. "You just handed me exactly what I need to end this completely." Terrence offered a small, quiet salute. "Just promise me you make it count. Monica and I are entirely finished with their toxicity. Whatever goodwill I once extended to that family died on Thanksgiving night." He met my eyes. "Burn it all down, Olivia." I stood up, gripped the handle of the briefcase, and felt a current of pure, clarifying adrenaline move through me from my heels to my fingertips. My security detail was waiting precisely where I had instructed them, halfway down the block, out of sight. I climbed into the back seat of my SUV, my mind already constructing the corporate acquisition strategy in full architectural detail. As my driver eased into the downtown traffic, the silence of the car was broken by a sharp buzz from my phone. A direct message notification from Instagram, forwarded by my public relations manager with a single word attached: urgent. I opened the screenshot. It was a post from Lexi's public account. Privacy settings fully disabled, visibility set to maximum, ensuring the post reached Bradley's family, my corporate investors, and the entirety of the city's social network simultaneously. The image was a crystal-clear black and white ultrasound photograph. In the soft background, the unmistakable stitched leather interior of Bradley's car was visible. Lexi had tagged Bradley's official account directly in the center of the image. The caption below it had been written with maximum, calculated toxicity. "The real heir to the fortune has arrived. Forget the bitter ex-wife. We are building a true legacy. Baby boy coming soon." I read it twice. Lexi genuinely believed she had secured everything. She believed this pregnancy was her golden ticket. Her guaranteed irrevocable claim to a lifetime of country club lunches, trust fund distributions, and luxury. She had convinced herself that stealing my husband had been the single smartest financial decision of her young life. She had absolutely no idea that the fortune she was publicly celebrating did not exist. She had no understanding that she had willingly chained herself to a broke, desperate fraud who was days away from complete financial ruin. She was making triumphant announcements about an inheritance that had already been foreclosed. I locked my phone screen and let out a single, cold, quiet laugh. The game had just escalated significantly, and I was holding every card in the deck. Lexi sat in the cramped, aggressively overpriced hotel room Bradley had charged to a card that was already showing stress fractures when they were escorted from my property. She was scrolling her phone with anticipatory delight, waiting for the wave of congratulations to arrive from Cynthia's country club circle. Instead, Bradley came through the door, face flushed, eyes wild, carrying the barely contained energy of a man watching his entire constructed reality disintegrate in real time. His credit cards were being declined across the city. The reality of frozen assets and exhausted credit limits was compressing around him from every direction, and the polished, charming facade that had sustained him for 7 comfortable, rent-free years was developing visible cracks. Lexi, blissfully unaware of the financial apocalypse currently obliterating every assumption her future had been built on, held up her phone and announced her expectations. Luxury penthouse viewings to begin immediately, a grand nursery befitting the heir of a highly successful commercial real estate empire. Bradley snapped. The carefully maintained performance shattered all at once. He hurled his leather briefcase across the room, unleashing a torrent of words that contained none of the polish he had spent years cultivating, calling her naive, calling her a gold digger, blaming her with vicious specificity for the destruction of his marriage, the loss of his rent-free lifestyle, and the implosion of every financial arrangement he had quietly depended on. He told her with raw, ugly clarity there were no penthouses, no trust funds, and no millions waiting for them anywhere. Lexi recoiled, pressing back against the cheap hotel headboard. But her greed, hardwired and reflexive, quickly overrode her instinct for self-preservation. She concluded that Bradley was simply lying, concealing his fortune from her, the way wealthy men conceal things during messy divorces. She decided to take the matter directly to the source. 2 hours later, David called my office line. A young woman matching Lexi's description was creating a significant scene in the main lobby. She was threatening, loudly and specifically, to contact local news outlets from the polished marble floor if I did not grant her an immediate meeting. I instructed David to bring her up. I wanted to see the delusion at full resolution, up close. The elevator opened and Lexi walked into my glass-walled office wearing designer maternity clothes she had clearly charged to Bradley's maxed-out accounts within the last 48 hours. She planted her designer bag on my desk with both hands and fixed me with a glare of entirely unearned, almost impressive confidence. She demanded a seat. I did not offer one. I remained behind my desk, hands folded, expression entirely neutral. Lexi crossed her arms, adopting what she clearly believed was an intimidating posture, and proceeded to lay out her extortion strategy with staggering, almost poignant arrogance. She had drafted a press release, she informed me. She had already made contact with 2 major tabloid journalists. She was prepared to sell a detailed, fabricated story about how I was a cold, ruthless corporate predator who had thrown my husband out into the freezing cold the moment I discovered he was expecting a child with a younger woman. She claimed the resulting publicity would crater my medical billing company and send every investor I had scrambling for the exit. Her terms were simple: $2 million, paid immediately and quietly, in exchange for her permanent silence. I listened to her entire presentation without blinking or interrupting once. When she finally finished, slightly breathless from the effort, I allowed a brief, genuine laugh. I opened the top drawer of my desk and produced a single neatly stapled document. I slid it across the glass surface toward her. Lexi looked down at the page, clearly expecting either a large check or a non-disclosure agreement prepared for her signature. What she found instead was a legally binding automobile loan contract. You should always read the fine print before signing financial documents at a luxury car dealership, Lexi, I said, leaning forward. Did Bradley tell you he was purchasing that Porsche for you outright? A lavish, unconditional gift drawn from his substantial real estate fortune? Lexi swallowed. Her eyes began moving rapidly across the document. He did not buy you anything, I said, my voice carrying cleanly off the glass walls. Bradley took out a high-interest loan for $120,000. But since Bradley possesses 0 verifiable assets, carries a considerable amount of concealed debt, and has a credit score that reflects both of those realities, the dealership required a secondary guarantor on the loan. Bradley used his charm and your excitement about the car to walk you through the paperwork quickly, without allowing you adequate time to read what you were actually signing. I paused. Look at the signature line at the bottom of the page. You are not the registered owner of a luxury vehicle. You are the legal co-signer of a $120,000 high-interest auto loan. Lexi stumbled backward. One hand flew to her mouth. The color left her face entirely as she stared at her own signature. My attorney formally froze all of Bradley's bank accounts yesterday afternoon, I continued, keeping my tone level and merciless. He cannot pay for the hotel room he is currently occupying, let alone a monthly luxury vehicle payment. That means the lender is coming directly to you. You are legally responsible for every single dollar of that debt. You are not securing a penthouse today, Lexi. You are about to have your wages garnished, your credit profile destroyed, and that car repossessed before the week is out. I let the silence compress for a moment. You attached your entire financial future to a bankrupt fraud who has been performing wealth for years without ever possessing it. Lexi folded into the guest chair she had previously demanded. She began to hyperventilate, the arrogant performance dissolving completely into undisguised, genuine terror. The reality of her situation landed with the full, catastrophic force of something that had been moving toward her at speed for a long time. She was pregnant, broke, legally bound to a mountain of toxic debt, and living in a cheap hotel room with a man who was currently screaming at her. She had not won a wealthy prize. She had been the final, unwitting instrument of his longest-running financial scam. "Get out of my office," I said, pointing toward the door. "And if you ever threaten me or this company again, my legal team will have you served with extortion and harassment charges before you finish packing whatever bags you can still afford." Lexi said nothing. She retrieved her handbag with visibly trembling hands and left the room without looking back, disappearing into the elevator bay with the hollowed-out expression of someone who has just watched the entire map of their future dissolve. I watched the elevator doors close. I felt no pity whatsoever. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my senior investment manager directly. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice precise and entirely focused. "Execute the corporate acquisition strategy we outlined. I need you to identify the exact commercial bank holding the defaulted mortgage on Cynthia's historic downtown building and purchase that bad debt immediately, whatever premium they require. Run the transaction through our anonymous shell company. I want legal ownership of that note by the close of business today." I set down the phone and drew one long, measured breath. The momentum of the morning was extraordinary. But the universe, it turned out, was not finished. 30 minutes after I issued the order to acquire Cynthia's debt, my executive assistant's voice came through the intercom. Representatives from Vanguard Health Systems had arrived for their classified meeting. I had been conducting negotiations with their corporate acquisition team for 6 months in conditions of absolute secrecy. Bradley had been so thoroughly convinced of my insignificance that he had never once glanced at my daily calendar, missing entirely the fact that I had been actively and patiently courting the largest healthcare technology conglomerate in North America. 4 men in immaculately tailored suits walked into my glass-walled office. Their lead negotiator, sharp-eyed, calm, and possessed of a well-documented reputation for aggressive corporate deal-making, bypassed pleasantries entirely. He opened his briefcase, withdrew a heavy-bound contract, and slid it across my desk. Their board of directors, he informed me, had voted unanimously to approve the final valuation of Horizon Medical Billing Solutions. They were proposing a complete acquisition buyout. The number printed in bold black ink on the summary page was $40 million. I kept my expression completely neutral, betraying not a single trace of the extraordinary, electric, deeply satisfying triumph moving through every part of me. $40 million, structured as a combination of liquid cash, vested stock options, and a guaranteed permanent seat on their executive advisory board. Bradley had just reduced his entire life to smoking rubble in a failed attempt to extort $5 million from me through a heavily contested divorce proceeding. He had thrown away 7 years of marriage for a cheap, reckless affair and a mountain of catastrophic auto debt he could not service. Meanwhile, I had been quietly and methodically assembling generational wealth directly beneath his completely oblivious nose. I signed the letter of intent with a hand that did not waver by a single millimeter. I imposed one condition, and it was entirely non-negotiable. The acquisition was to remain under an ironclad, airtight non-disclosure agreement until the final documents were executed the following week. No press releases, no industry whispers, no celebratory announcements of any kind. I needed Bradley and his desperate, delusional mother to remain completely blind to the staggering magnitude of capital I now commanded. The Vanguard executives shook my hand warmly and filed out of the boardroom. The moment the last one cleared the doorway, my private cell phone illuminated with a secure message from my senior investment manager. He had executed my earlier directive with the kind of ruthless, systematic efficiency that I had specifically hired him for. Operating through a highly insulated shell company we had established years prior for legitimate tax optimization purposes, my team had approached the commercial bank holding the defaulted mortgage on Cynthia's beloved historic downtown building with a straightforward proposition. Banks are deeply averse to carrying toxic, non-performing assets on their books, particularly when the debtor is 90 days delinquent, demonstrably bankrupt, and showing no realistic path to recovery. When my shell company presented a premium cash offer for the distressed debt, the bank moved with the kind of speed that institutions reserve for problems they are desperately relieved to have resolved. The digital wire transfer was complete. My investment manager attached the scanned commercial promissory note and deed of trust. I downloaded both files, reviewed them with the particular, savoring attention of someone reading a document they have been working toward for a very long time, and forwarded a secure copy to Terrence. He replied within 2 minutes. A thumbs-up emoji, followed by, "She has absolutely no idea the bank sold her out." I opened the legal files on my desktop monitor and read through the dense technical language with careful, deliberate pleasure. The bank no longer held any legal interest in the historic building where Cynthia hosted her extravagant society events. I owned the debt. I held the absolute court-recognized legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings, seize the physical asset in its entirety, and evict any current occupant without prior notice or negotiation. In the span of a single afternoon, I had transformed from the mocked, dismissed, invisible daughter-in-law into Cynthia's sole, undisputed financial executioner. Terrence had handed me the complete blueprint of their fraud. Now I was holding the actual weapon. Cynthia had bled her family trust fund dry over years of compulsive, performative spending to maintain a hollow illusion of grandeur. That illusion now lived in a digital folder on my encrypted hard drive. She was operating on borrowed time, with the full and total certainty that she had no idea the clock had already stopped. I had expected Cynthia to be in retreat, hiding in her suburban rental, quietly panicking as her social standing eroded and Bradley's funds evaporated. I had expected her to be defensive and diminished. I had severely underestimated the bottomless, terrifying depth of her narcissistic delusion. Late that afternoon, a specialized courier arrived at my corporate headquarters. He bypassed the standard mailroom entirely and insisted on delivering his package directly into the hands of my head of security. David brought the sleek matte black envelope up to my office, his expression carrying the faintly skeptical look of a man who has seen too much to be easily surprised, but who found this particular delivery worth noting. I sliced open the heavy cardstock envelope with a silver letter opener. Inside was a lavishly produced, gold-embossed invitation, the kind of object that practically radiates its own desperate pretension. It was an exclusive invitation to the annual winter charity gala. The venue listed in elegant calligraphy was none other than the historic downtown commercial building. The very building she no longer possessed any legal right to occupy. The building that now sat, in its entirety, within my investment portfolio. Cynthia was not retreating. She was not regrouping. She was not quietly reassessing the catastrophic position she was in. She was doubling down. But it was the handwritten note affixed to the back of the invitation that most vividly illuminated the full scale of her detachment from reality. Written on her personally embossed expensive cream stationery in her distinctive, looping script. I thought family. Feel free to stand outside the velvet ropes and watch. I read it twice. I set it down on my desk. A slow, cold, deeply satisfying thrill moved through me from the base of my spine to the top of my skull. Cynthia genuinely believed she had won. She believed she could engineer one final, definitive public humiliation, using her grand charity gala as a weapon to reassert her dominance and remind the city's elite exactly where she stood, and exactly where I did not. She believed she was untouchable because she believed she was standing inside a fortress of old money and generational authority. She had absolutely no idea that the fortress had been built entirely on quicksand. She had no idea that the woman she had just personally invited to stand outside the velvet ropes was the legal owner of the entire building, the surrounding property, and every square foot of floor the velvet ropes rested on. She wanted a public spectacle. She wanted an audience of wealthy investors, local politicians, and country club influencers to witness her triumph. I smiled, running my fingertips slowly along the gold-embossed lettering on the invitation. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. I was going to attend her charity gala. And I was going to perform a completely public, entirely legal, meticulously orchestrated execution of her fraudulent empire in front of every important witness she had personally assembled. My phone began vibrating against the marble vanity of my master bathroom with the relentless, frantic energy of someone experiencing a complete psychological unraveling. I did not need to check the caller ID. Bradley was cut off from my accounts, living out of a budget highway motel on a declining credit card, with no attorney and no strategy. But his ego, that extraordinary, indestructible monument to unearned self-regard, remained entirely, magnificently intact. I picked up the device and watched the messages flood my locked screen in rapid succession. Do not even think about showing up tonight. I saw the charity gala guest list. You do not belong in that building. A second arrived immediately after. You are a nobody. You have zero class and zero breeding. You will look like an absolute clown attempting to mingle with my family's investors. And then a third. Stay home, Olivia. Save yourself the humiliation. You do not have the pedigree to walk past those velvet ropes. You are just a bitter, desperate ex-wife trying to crash a society event where you are completely and entirely unwanted. I read all three. I felt absolutely nothing. Bradley still operated under the foundational delusion that his words carried weight, that he could bully me into compliance and silence from a stained mattress in a roadside motel, because he remained convinced that his family represented the pinnacle of legitimate social power. He was clinging, white-knuckled, to the fiction that Cynthia's historic building was still a fortress, completely unaware that it was sitting, in full legal transfer, inside my corporate investment portfolio. I did not type a single word in response. I swiped the notifications away with one finger and locked the screen without ceremony. Absolute, total silence is the most devastating weapon available against a narcissist who is losing his grip. It communicates, far more effectively than any argument, that his existence no longer merits a reaction. I turned back to the mirror. I was not simply getting dressed for a Friday evening charity gala. I was arming myself with surgical precision for a corporate execution that needed to be performed in public, in front of an audience Cynthia had specifically curated, with every element calibrated for maximum and permanent effect. I had retained an elite, strictly confidential styling team for the occasion. These were not local salon professionals. They were top-tier specialists who routinely prepared A-list executives and internationally prominent figures for major media appearances and high-stakes public events. I paid them double their premium rate to guarantee absolute, uncompromising perfection in every detail. My makeup was applied with the precision of someone who understood that every element was a statement, sharp, commanding, and entirely without apology. My hair was swept into a sleek architectural upstyle that communicated authority before a single word was spoken. Then came the wardrobe. I did not retrieve a dress from a closet or pull something from a rack. I stepped into a custom haute couture gown in deep emerald green that I had had flown in specifically and exclusively for this occasion. The heavy silk material moved with my body with the fluid, seamless grace of something that had been designed for precisely this frame, falling to the floor in a line that was simultaneously restrained and commanding. It was a garment engineered to own a room the exact second its wearer crossed the threshold. But the dress was merely the canvas. The true statement sat inside a heavy, reinforced velvet box on my vanity. I lifted the lid. The overhead lights found the stones immediately, igniting them into cascading, fractured brilliance. A custom diamond necklace with matching drop earrings, flawless certified stones, set by hand, in a configuration that had been designed to catch light from across a large room. The combined value of these specific pieces exceeded the total maximum lifetime value of Cynthia's entirely depleted family trust fund by a comfortable and significant margin. I was not wearing these diamonds because they were beautiful. I was wearing them as an unambiguous, publicly visible declaration of extreme, self-generated liquid capital. Cynthia and Bradley had spent years playing dress-up with borrowed money and maxed-out credit cards, projecting the image of generational wealth while quietly suffocating beneath compounding toxic debt. I was about to walk into their fabricated kingdom wearing the undeniable, tangible proof of $40 million in self-made, fully realized, entirely unencumbered wealth. I fastened the clasp around my neck, feeling the cool weight of the stones settle against my collarbone. I looked at my reflection without flinching. A 33-year-old chief executive officer looked back at me. No fear, no hesitation, no residual uncertainty. Entirely, completely prepared to perform a public autopsy on a family of frauds who had spent 7 years underestimating her. I picked up my designer clutch and walked out. The crisp night air moved over me as I stepped onto the driveway. My private security detail was already in position around a pristine, midnight black Maybach. The chauffeur, dressed in an immaculate dark suit, stepped forward and opened the heavy rear door with quiet, practiced respect. I settled into the buttery leather seat. The cabin sealed itself around me in near-perfect silence. As the luxury vehicle moved smoothly through the city toward the historic downtown financial district, I checked my phone one final time. A secure, encrypted message from Terrence was waiting. The trap is perfectly set. Monica and I are already inside. We have our popcorn ready. Bring the house down, Olivia. I replied with a single checkmark and put the phone away. The Maybach turned the final corner onto the main downtown avenue. The grand neoclassical facade of Cynthia's historic building came into view, illuminated against the cold night sky by warm, carefully positioned lighting designed to maximize its visual grandeur. Cynthia, trapped in her infinite, impenetrable delusion, had hired a full press corps for the evening: freelance photographers, local society reporters, and event videographers, assembled to manufacture a faux red carpet atmosphere outside the main entrance. She wanted extensive, flattering documentation of her continued reign over the city's elite. She wanted photographs of herself alongside wealthy donors and influential investors that could be deployed to attract a new wave of financing for Bradley's perpetually fictional real estate ventures. Thick red velvet ropes lined the wide sidewalk. The hired press was already active as minor socialites and local politicians climbed out of leased town cars and standard luxury vehicles and made their way dutifully toward the entrance. It was precisely the kind of elaborately staged, carefully managed spectacle Cynthia considered her natural habitat. My driver did not join the queue. He bypassed the line of arriving vehicles entirely and brought the Maybach directly to the VIP curb, stopping with immaculate precision at the edge of the red carpet. The sheer physical presence of the ultra-luxury vehicle, its size, its finish, its absolute absence of compromise, immediately and completely redirected the attention of every person on the sidewalk. The murmurs moved through the gathered crowd like a current. Cynthia's hired photographers abandoned the minor guests they were currently shooting without hesitation or ceremony, practically pushing each other sideways in their rush to position themselves in front of my vehicle. Every lens, every microphone, every blazing camera flash pivoted simultaneously toward the tinted rear window of the Maybach. The heavy door opened. I stepped out onto the pavement. The emerald green silk caught the barrage of flashes and held the light, radiating it outward in waves. The press corps erupted. The local politicians and socialites who had just completed their own walk became instantly invisible. The crowd parted ahead of me as I moved forward, my custom diamond necklace fracturing the camera flashes into a constellation of reflected light moving across every surface around me. I did not pause for photographs. I did not acknowledge the shouted questions. I walked directly and without deceleration straight past the thick velvet ropes, with the absolute, unself-conscious authority of a woman who owned every inch of the ground she was walking on. Because she did. The grand ballroom of the historic downtown building was a masterclass in the aesthetics of financial delusion. Crystal chandeliers hung in tiers from the vaulted ceiling, casting warm amber light over hundreds of elite investors, hospital administrators, and country club members. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos moved through the crowd bearing silver trays of vintage champagne and imported caviar. The air carried expensive perfume, ambient music, and the low, purposeful hum of serious networking. Every surface gleamed. Every detail had been curated to project an atmosphere of effortless, permanent, inherited abundance. It was Cynthia's vision of herself, rendered in 3 dimensions. The moment I crossed the threshold, the room changed. It began as a wave of hushed voices near the entrance, spreading rapidly outward across the ballroom floor like a tide. Heads rotated. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. The assembled elite, many of whom had been consuming Cynthia's carefully distributed allegations about my supposed embezzlement and instability for 2 weeks, stared at me with a volatile mixture of shock, morbid fascination, and the particular discomfort of people who are suddenly uncertain which version of events is accurate. I kept my spine perfectly straight, my heels finding their rhythm against the polished marble as I moved without hesitation toward the center of the room. Cynthia was stationed near the main stage, champagne in hand, performing warmth and confidence for a cluster of conservative angel investors. I watched the precise moment her eyes found me across the crowd. The blood left her face in one complete, instantaneous evacuation. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled, nearly tipping her glass. She assessed my gown. She assessed the diamonds resting at my collarbone. She understood immediately, with the instinctive literacy of a woman who had spent 60 years performing wealth, that these were not rented pieces, not borrowed, not staged. She was looking at undeniable self-generated capital, wearing itself. A cornered narcissist will always double down rather than retreat. It is the defining characteristic of the condition. Instead of recalibrating, Cynthia handed her glass to a passing waiter, gathered herself visibly, and walked with deliberate purpose up the steps of the main stage. She gestured to the audio technician. A sharp feedback whine from the microphone cut through the ambient noise of the room, silencing the remaining conversation in an instant. Hundreds of heads turned toward the stage. Cynthia arranged her expression into a portrait of maternal sorrow, pressing one hand to her chest with practiced, theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she projected, allowing a carefully measured tremor to enter her voice. "I am so deeply sorry for this interruption to what has been a beautiful evening. We gathered here tonight to celebrate philanthropy and community, but it appears we have an uninvited and unwanted presence among us." She leveled one trembling, manicured finger directly at me, ensuring every camera and every set of eyes in the room tracked the gesture without ambiguity. "That woman standing there is my son's soon-to-be ex-wife, Olivia. As many of you are already aware, she has been experiencing a prolonged and severe psychological breakdown. She is a deeply disturbed individual who fabricated an elaborate corporate persona to conceal years of deliberate financial crimes committed against my family. She has been actively stalking my son and harassing everyone connected to us since we uncovered her embezzlement. I personally and explicitly banned her from attending this event. And yet here she is, a pathetic, obsessive intruder, attempting to crash an exclusive gathering she has absolutely no legitimate reason to attend. Please," she continued, producing a single performative tear and pressing her fingertip beneath her eye with exaggerated delicacy, "do not engage with her. She is dangerous and entirely unmoored from reality. Security, please come forward immediately and remove this disturbed woman from my building before she causes any harm to our esteemed guests." 4 broad-shouldered event security guards detached from the walls in unison and began advancing toward me in a clear, coordinated line. The crowd parted ahead of them, opening a wide, unobstructed path to where I stood. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to explain myself to the gullible, pearl-clutching audience surrounding me. I simply stood at the center of the grand ballroom in my emerald silk, radiating a calm so complete and so absolute that it had its own gravitational field. I allowed a slow, precise smile to cross my face. I knew something that not a single other person in that room knew. I knew the exact time the court order had been scheduled to be served. The lead security guard closed the distance between us, his hand extending toward my arm. "Ma'am, you need to vacate the premises immediately," he said, his voice carrying professional certainty. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my gaze fixed on Cynthia's triumphant, gloating expression from the stage above. Before the guard's fingers made contact with the silk of my sleeve, a deafening, concussive crash erupted from the rear of the ballroom. The massive, heavy oak double doors of the historic building were slammed open from the outside with such force that the impact reverberated through the floor, through the walls, and up into the crystal chandeliers, setting them swaying overhead in visible agitation. The 4 security guards froze and turned simultaneously. The entire ballroom produced a single, collective gasp. Marching through the entrance was not a late VIP arrival. It was the city's chief of police, full formal uniform, brass-polished, posture immovable, flanked on either side by 4 heavily armed uniformed officers. Walking at his immediate right was a sharply focused legal representative, carrying a thick, extensively stamped clipboard under one arm and a substantial stack of court documents under the other. The authority radiating from the police formation was total and instantaneous. The music stopped. The ambient murmur of the crowd ceased. In the vast, ornate space, the sound of dress shoes on marble was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. The chief of police bypassed the velvet ropes without breaking stride, bypassed the frozen event staff, and marched with complete directional certainty toward the main stage. He did not acknowledge the wealthy investors. He did not glance at the socialites. He walked straight to the base of the stage and looked up at Cynthia, who was still gripping the silver microphone with both hands, her knuckles white. The legal representative stepped forward and raised his voice with crisp, deliberate clarity. Cynthia, you are hereby served with an immediate, non-negotiable commercial eviction notice. He held the court-ordered documents upright so the room could see the official stamps. This property has been seized in consequence of critical, sustained default on a commercial mortgage obligation. This gathering constitutes an illegal assembly on privately held, foreclosed real estate. All occupants are required to vacate the premises immediately or face criminal trespassing charges. Cynthia's face collapsed. The microphone picked up her ragged, uncontrolled breathing and amplified it across the ballroom with merciless fidelity. The assembled elite stared up at her, and the carefully constructed fiction of her generational wealth, her untouchable social standing, her family's permanent place at the top of the city's hierarchy, disintegrated in real time in front of every witness she had personally invited. "You have made a catastrophic mistake," Cynthia shrieked into the microphone, her voice fracturing into a register of pure, exposed panic. "You cannot do this to me. I am the owner of this property. I have always been the owner. This is my family's legacy." The chief of police did not flinch. He stepped firmly onto the first stair of the stage and raised his voice with the calm, final authority of a man who has never once in his career needed to repeat himself twice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this commercial property is now under the complete and undisputed legal possession of its primary creditor. Every person currently inside this building is trespassing on seized, foreclosed real estate. I am ordering an immediate, orderly evacuation of the premises. Please identify the nearest exit and vacate now." The grand ballroom became chaos. Hospital administrators and conservative angel investors, who had been sipping vintage champagne 60 seconds ago, abandoned their glasses mid-air, the crystal shattering against the marble floor as they moved with extraordinary speed toward the coat check and the exits. No one in the upper echelons of this city's social and financial world wanted their name or photograph associated with a police raid, a defaulted commercial mortgage, and a very public fraud exposure. The evacuation was not dignified. It was a stampede in evening wear. Cynthia stood on the stage and watched her entire cultivated universe, every relationship she had spent decades curating, every social alliance she had carefully maintained, every piece of the elaborate performance she had constructed and inhabited as though it were real, come apart in real time, as the people she had spent her life impressing streamed past her without a backward glance. Then a figure forced his way through the moving crowd in the opposite direction. Bradley stormed toward the front of the stage, face contorted, eyes bloodshot, vibrating with the specific, catastrophic energy of a man for whom the gap between delusion and reality has just closed without warning. He had spent his entire adult life operating on the toxic assumption that consequences and rules were constructs that applied to other people. He marched directly up to the chief of police, pointing one aggressive finger into the officer's face. "You listen to me," Bradley barked, his chest inflated with the last remaining reserves of his unearned performative authority. "I am a top-tier commercial real estate broker. You do not have the right to march into a private charity event and shut it down on the basis of some clerical error. My mother is the owner of this historic property. You are making a serious, career-ending legal mistake, and I will personally ensure that you lose your badge for this." The chief of police regarded him with the steady, practiced contempt of a man who has heard every version of this particular speech. The legal representative beside him simply raised the foreclosure documents, tapping the bold red ink at the top with one deliberate finger. "Sir," the officer said, his hand resting loosely on his utility belt, "step back immediately. Interference with a court-ordered commercial eviction is a criminal offense. You will leave this building in handcuffs if you take one more step forward. Bradley, completely hollowed out by toxic arrogance and the desperate, frantic need to maintain his persona in front of the witnesses who remained, did the worst possible thing available to him. He lunged forward, attempting to physically push the chief of police aside to reach the stage. Within a fraction of a second, two officers had Bradley by his tailored lapels. They wrenched his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency and brought him hard against the edge of the wooden stage. Bradley made a sound of genuine pain, his cheek pressed against the polished floorboards, his expensive suit tearing audibly at the shoulder seam, as the officers secured him completely. The room was a fractured, deteriorating symphony of shouted commands and the rapid percussion of expensive shoes on marble. And I was an island of absolute total stillness at its center. I drew one slow breath. Then I began to walk. The heavy silk of my emerald gown moved against the marble floor in a sound that was almost gentle. The guests who had not yet reached the exits backed away as I passed, opening a path without being asked. My custom diamonds caught the flashing red and blue light from the police cruisers parked outside the tall windows, sending refracted beams drifting across the walls and ceiling in slow, deliberate arcs. I did not look at Bradley struggling against the officers below the stage. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Cynthia. She was standing at the center of the stage, frozen, still clutching the silver microphone, shaking with a violence that was visible from across the room. She watched me climb the carpeted stairs one deliberate, unhurried step at a time. Her eyes were wide and stripped of every layer of practiced performance, every cultivated pretension, every carefully maintained illusion. She finally understood that the timing of the police raid was not coincidence. I walked directly to her. Cynthia retreated a single involuntary step, the instinctive recoil of someone who has, at last, correctly identified what they are actually looking at. She was no longer seeing the compliant, invisible daughter-in-law she had dismissed and mocked and underestimated for 7 consecutive years. She was seeing, for the first time with total clarity, the corporate executioner who had been in the room all along. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and removed the silver microphone from her trembling hand with one firm, unhurried motion. A brief feedback tone rang out and subsided. I looked out at the remaining crowd, a fraction of what had entered this room an hour ago, and then brought my gaze back to my former mother-in-law. "You were the owner, Cynthia," I said, my voice carrying through the ballroom speakers with a clarity and authority that filled every corner of the space. "But you bled your family trust completely dry. You defaulted substantially and repeatedly on your commercial mortgage. The bank exhausted its patience with your promises and sold your toxic, non-performing debt to an anonymous investment company to close their exposure." I paused for precisely one beat. Cynthia's hands flew to her mouth. She stumbled backward, her designer heels snagging on the stage carpet, as the full weight of what I was about to say crashed into her before the words even landed. I let a slow, razor-edged smile find its way to my face. It offered nothing resembling mercy. "And as of 9 o'clock this morning, that investment company belongs entirely to me. This historic building, including the grand ballroom you are currently standing in, is my personal property. You are trespassing on my real estate." I turned to face the remaining guests and raised one open hand in a gesture of genuine, unhurried welcome. "Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the official celebration of my complete and permanent financial independence." Cynthia let out a sound that was less a voice than a rupture. A choked, devastated sob torn from somewhere beneath all the performance, and collapsed to her knees on the stage floor. 60 years of fabricated grandeur, social performance, and borrowed authority ended in a single moment, in front of the only audience that had ever mattered to her. Below the stage, the full weight of my words penetrated Bradley's comprehension. The complete, irreversible magnitude of what he had lost, what he had never owned, but had been permitted to occupy, severed the last remaining cable holding him to anything coherent. With a raw, unhinged scream, he wrenched himself violently from the officer's grip and vaulted onto the stage with his eyes wild and his hands reaching directly for my throat. I stood my ground, bracing. A massive figure stepped out from the shadows of the heavy stage curtains. Terrence drove his full weight into Bradley with the absolute, decisive force of a man who has been waiting a very long time for this specific moment. They hit the hardwood together with a bone-deep, resonant crash that reverberated through the floor of the stage and into the walls of the building. Terrence, deploying his broader frame and a composure that did not waver for a single second, pinned my soon-to-be ex-husband firmly and completely to the floor. Bradley thrashed against the polished wood, his voice pouring out a torrent of incoherent, vile profanity, the shoulder seam of his expensive suit opening further with each movement. The two officers, recovering their positions within seconds, swarmed the stage together. They hauled Bradley upright by his arms, and cold steel handcuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp, clean, definitive click. The sound carried across the entire ballroom. Cynthia, still on her knees in her ruined designer gown, absorbed the scene from the floor of the stage. But her horror, in that moment, was not for her son being placed in handcuffs for attempted assault. Her horror was directed entirely at the man standing over Bradley. She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking violently, pointing one accusing finger at Terrence with the desperate, cornered energy of someone who has run out of every other option. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice reduced to a jagged, cracking pitch. "Terrence, you are supposed to protect this family. You are supposed to fix this. Call the bank right now and clear this debt. Pay this woman whatever she is demanding and get my son out of those handcuffs. Family protects family. You are my son-in-law. Do your job. Save our legacy before these people take everything." Terrence stood up slowly. He smoothed the front of his gray suit with both hands. He did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked, with perfect, quiet precision, like a man who has been holding an extraordinary amount of patience for a very long time and has just set it down for good. He adjusted his cuffs. He stepped past Bradley without looking at him. He walked directly toward me, and when he reached me, he met my eyes and gave me a single, deliberate nod of genuine, unqualified respect. I handed him the microphone without hesitation. $40 million, structured as liquid cash, vested stock options, and a guaranteed permanent seat on Vanguard's executive advisory board. Bradley had reduced his entire existence to smoldering wreckage in a failed attempt to extort $5 million from me through a contested divorce proceeding. He had thrown away 7 years of marriage for a reckless affair and a mountain of catastrophic debt he could not service by any means available to him. Meanwhile, I had been quietly, methodically, and entirely without his knowledge, assembling generational wealth directly beneath his oblivious nose. I signed the letter of intent with a hand that did not tremble by a single degree. One condition, absolute, entirely non-negotiable, was attached to my signature. The acquisition was to remain under an ironclad non-disclosure agreement until the final documents were executed the following week. No press releases, no industry whispers, no celebrations of any kind. I needed Bradley and his delusional mother to remain completely and perfectly blind to the staggering magnitude of capital I now controlled. The ballroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence once more. The few remaining elite investors and high society socialites who had not yet fled to their waiting town cars and luxury sedans paused near the grand exit doors. They turned back. Whatever dignity had compelled them toward the exits evaporated entirely in the face of something far more compelling: the absolute, spectacular, and historically unprecedented public destruction of the city's most pretentious family, playing out on a stage that now legally belonged to the woman they had spent the evening pitying. Terrence gripped the silver microphone tightly. He looked down from the stage at Cynthia, who stared up at him with wide, desperate, pleading eyes, the eyes of a woman who had spent 6 decades extracting value from other people, and was now, in the most public circumstances imaginable, calling in her last available debt. She fully expected him to produce a multi-million-dollar check and bail out her pathetic vanity empire on the spot. "You want me to do my job, Cynthia?" Terrence asked, his deep, measured voice booming with perfect clarity through the venue's sound system. "I am a forensic accountant. My entire professional career has been built on tracking missing assets, identifying corporate fraud, and formally exposing catastrophic financial liabilities to the appropriate authorities. So." He paused, and the pause carried the weight of someone who has been holding something back for a very long time. "Allow me to do my exact job right here, in front of every one of your esteemed country club friends and potential investors." Cynthia took one shaking step backward. Both hands flew to her mouth. For the second time that evening, the color abandoned her face in one complete, instantaneous evacuation. "With my full professional authority and legal standing," Terrence declared, ensuring every syllable carried to the furthest corner of the room, "I officially confirm that this family is completely and irreversibly bankrupt." He let that land. "There is no generational wealth. The sacred family trust fund you have bragged about throughout your entire social career has been entirely empty for 5 years. You and Bradley have been funding your lavish, fabricated lifestyles through predatory personal loans, maximized high-interest credit cards, and sustained, deliberate financial deception. You are completely broke. Your combined credit scores are, to use a precise technical term, radioactive." Bradley, still being physically steered toward the stage stairs by the 2 officers, thrashed against his restraints with renewed, frantic energy. "Shut your mouth, Terrence!" he roared, spittle flying as the officers forced him forward. "You have absolutely no right to discuss our private finances in a public venue." "I have every right," Terrence replied, his voice slicing through Bradley's outburst with the clean, surgical precision of a man who deals exclusively in verified, documented facts. "Because for the past 2 years, you and your mother have been covertly attempting to siphon money from my personal accounts to cover your mounting liabilities. You solicited business loans you had zero intention of repaying. You attempted to leverage my pristine credit history to secure new lines of funding for your fictitious real estate ventures. You treated my wife and me as your personal, unlimited, on-demand automated banking machines." Terrence shifted his gaze from the stage and looked directly out into the remaining crowd. I followed his line of sight. Standing near the velvet ropes at the base of the stage was Monica. She looked small in the vast space of the emptying ballroom, but her posture was something entirely different from the hunched, quietly horrified woman I had watched at the Thanksgiving table. She stood completely upright, her spine straight, her chin level. Tears moved freely down her cheeks, making quiet ruin of her elegant makeup. She did not wipe them away. She looked up at her husband with an expression of absolute, unwavering, unambiguous support. The look of a woman who has finally, irrevocably decided which side of history she is standing on. "As a husband," Terrence continued, his voice shifting from the precise, professional register of a forensic accountant to something deeper and fiercer, the voice of a man protecting what he has built. "Monica and I are officially and permanently cutting all financial and emotional ties with both of you. We are done being manipulated. We are done being gaslit into funding your toxic, narcissistic illusions of grandeur. We will not allow you to extract a single additional cent from our family's future. From this moment forward, you are entirely on your own." Down on the floor, Monica gave one firm, unhesitating nod. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at her screaming brother. She simply turned her back on the toxic bloodline that had defined and confined her entire life, stood perfectly still, and breathed. She was breaking a cycle of financial abuse that had been compounding for decades, and she was doing it in front of an audience, without flinching. Cynthia let out a shallow, ragged gasp. The absolute reality of her situation, the full, unobstructed, undeniable totality of it, crushed the last remaining structural pillar of her composure. She had lost her historic building. Her golden child was being marched out of the room in handcuffs. And now her final safety net, the wealthy, respectable son-in-law she had spent years manipulating, and the compliant daughter she had spent years silencing, had publicly, permanently, and irreversibly severed every remaining connection to her. She was entirely isolated, stripped of her wealth, her family, and the social standing she had sacrificed everything real to maintain. The sheer psychological weight of the total collapse hit her with the physical force of something structural giving way all at once. She let out a weak, breathless sound, less a word than an involuntary exhalation of complete defeat. Her hands flew upward, clutching the fabric over her chest, her eyes rolled back, fluttering. Her knees buckled completely beneath her, and she collapsed with a heavy, graceless impact onto the hard wooden floorboards of the stage, her designer gown pooling uselessly around her motionless body. I stood a few feet away, my emerald silk entirely still. I looked out at the remaining crowd of elite socialites, hospital administrators, and wealthy investors. In any normal circumstance, a room full of people would instinctively move toward an elderly woman who has just collapsed, offering assistance, calling for help, clearing space. Not a single person moved. The wealthy socialites stared down at Cynthia with expressions of profound, icy, entirely unsentimental disgust. They clutched their purses, turned away from the stage, and exited the building with the brisk efficiency of people putting distance between themselves and a scandal they want no association with. They stepped over the ruins of her reputation without breaking stride. Cynthia lay completely alone on the stage of my building, abandoned, in her most devastating moment, by the very elite society she had spent her entire life and every cent she had ever possessed, attempting to impress and belong to. The two police officers hauled Bradley upright by his tailored lapels. The metallic, definitive sound of handcuffs securing his wrists behind his back rang out across the stage with the clear, poetic finality of a closing argument. Bradley's face was a portrait of absolute, unmasked humiliation. He twisted his neck frantically, his eyes darting toward the main entrance where Cynthia's hired photographers and society reporters were pressed against the velvet ropes, their long lenses aimed directly at him, capturing every angle of the collapse with professional thoroughness. The carefully constructed image of the untouchable, wealthy commercial real estate titan was disintegrating in real time, and it was being documented extensively. He pleaded with the officers in a whisper that had lost every trace of its former authority. He begged them not to walk him through the grand lobby in front of the fleeing crowd and the aggressive cameras. He demanded the service corridors, the back exits, anything to escape the visual record of what he had become. The officers, who had been assaulted by this man less than 15 minutes ago and who were entirely unbothered by his sudden, desperate concern for appearances, steered him roughly toward the heavy service doors leading to the catering kitchen and the back alley exit. I stood on the main stage, my emerald gown perfectly immaculate, watching his retreat with the quiet, absolute satisfaction of a person who has waited a very long time for precisely this view. The universe, it turned out, had one more contribution to make. As the officers shoved open the heavy service doors, a figure burst through from the other side, violently colliding with them in the doorway. The impact was loud, disorganized, and immediately charged with a particular, unmistakable kind of energy. It was Lexi. She looked nothing, not a single physical detail, like the polished, smug assistant who had leaned against my husband's arm in my dining room on Thanksgiving evening. The transformation was staggering in its completeness. Her expensive designer maternity coat was improperly fastened and severely wrinkled. Her carefully highlighted hair was tangled and wind-blown into a chaotic disaster. Thick streaks of dissolved mascara ran unchecked down both cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She had the look of someone who has been crying in a car for several hours and has stopped caring what that looks like. She bypassed the building security entirely, powered by a singular, high-voltage, entirely destructive rage, and locked her bloodshot eyes on Bradley. She did not register the handcuffs, or she registered them, and did not care. She pushed past the officer's stern warnings, planted her feet on the marble floor of the service corridor, and unleashed a sound. A visceral, piercing, full-bodied scream that instantly commandeered the attention of every remaining person in the venue. She raised her left hand. Her fingers were shaking with visible, violent fury. She wrenched the large, glittering engagement ring from her finger with one fierce, deliberate motion. She wound back her arm and hurled it directly at Bradley with everything she had. The sharp metal edge struck him squarely on the cheekbone with an audible, satisfying smack before bouncing off and skittering uselessly across the polished floor. Cubic zirconia. You proposed to me with a worthless piece of manufactured glass. Lexi's voice cracked with the concentrated venom of someone who has just had their entire constructed reality destroyed by a pawn shop appraiser. I walked into the most exclusive jeweler in the financial district this afternoon to sell that stone so I could cover the deposit on the luxury penthouse you promised me. The appraiser laughed directly in my face. He told me it was a cheap counterfeit prop worth less than the velvet box it came in. Bradley writhed helplessly between the officers, his face burning a deep, mortified crimson as the rapid shutter clicks of cameras documented every involuntary expression crossing his face. He begged her to lower her voice, promising with the reflexive confidence of a man who has never once kept a promise that he would fix everything. Lexi was not interested in his promises. She was finished with the role of supportive mistress. The full weight of the financial liability she had discovered that afternoon had broken the last remaining thread of her investment in him. She turned her body to face the cluster of reporters and society bloggers who were recording with the focused intensity of journalists who understand they are witnessing something that will be discussed for a very long time. He is completely broke, she announced to the cameras, making sure her voice carried across the entire space without ambiguity. This so-called commercial real estate mogul is a comprehensive, documented fraud. He has spent the last 4 hours screaming at me in a cheap highway motel room. He demanded that I go to a medical clinic tomorrow morning and terminate my pregnancy, because he does not have a single dollar to his name. He told me he cannot afford basic necessities because he is currently drowning in $200,000 of high-interest credit card debt. She took one breath. Debt that he fraudulently opened in my legal name because his own credit score was too destroyed to qualify for anything. The collective gasp from the remaining crowd was deafening and immediate. The reporters typed with the focused electric speed of people who understand they are holding a story that writes itself. Bradley's carefully maintained aristocratic persona did not merely crack, it disintegrated into fine ash, leaving nothing recognizable behind. The wealthy hospital administrators and conservative angel investors, who had previously tolerated his presence at various social functions, looked at him now with a quality of revulsion that went well beyond financial disapproval. He was no longer simply a man who had lived off his successful wife. He was publicly revealed as a predator, a man who had manipulated a young woman into financial ruin, and then, when his funding disappeared, demanded she eliminate the evidence of his own choices. The image of the confident, self-made heir vanished entirely and permanently, leaving behind nothing but a broke, handcuffed, morally bankrupt con artist standing under the lights of a building he had never owned, being documented by cameras his mother had personally hired to celebrate her own triumph. I watched from the stage. I watched the precise, unhurried moment karma completed its work. He had spent 7 years making me feel invisible, small, and irrelevant. He was being publicly and comprehensively dismantled by the woman he had chosen to replace me, and she was doing it far more efficiently than I ever could have. Bradley opened his mouth with the desperate, reflexive instinct of a man who has spent his entire adult life talking his way out of consequences. He searched the empty machinery of his mind for a plausible lie, a deflection, a story that would land. Before a single word could form, every smartphone in the room fired simultaneously. It began as a collective vibration, a subtle, synchronized tremor moving through pockets and purses across the grand ballroom, and escalated within seconds into a sharp, unmistakable symphony of notification tones and chimes. Every device belonging to every remaining guest, every journalist, every investor, every society blogger present rang at the exact same second. The distinct, high-priority alert of a major financial publication's breaking news notification. Bradley looked down at the glowing screen of the reporter standing closest to him. His eyes found the headline, and whatever remained of his composure, of his delusion, of his capacity for self-deception, ended. The sharp, synchronized chiming of 100 smartphones commandeered the remaining atmosphere of the grand ballroom with total authority. The alert had not originated from a local outlet or a city gossip column. It was an emergency breaking news notification from the Wall Street Journal mobile application, pushed simultaneously to every registered subscriber in the financial district. The wealthy investors, hospital administrators, and assembled society reporters looked down at their glowing screens with the instinctive, collective attention that only a WSJ alert commands. The frantic whispering stopped. The camera flashes paused. The room stood perfectly still. Bradley, still firmly restrained by the two officers, craned his neck with ragged, desperate urgency. He managed to angle his line of sight toward the reporter's phone a few feet away. The reporter was staring at the screen with his mouth completely open, entirely oblivious to everything else happening around him. Bradley focused his bloodshot eyes on the headline. The words burned themselves directly and permanently into his retinas. Horizon Medical Billing Solutions acquired by Vanguard Health Systems. Female tech founder and CEO Olivia closes landmark buyout deal for $40 million. The subtitle beneath the headline was, "If anything, more devastating." Completely self-funded, highly profitable medical software enterprise, previously operating in stealth mode, finalizes all cash and stock acquisition. Brilliant 33-year-old founder secures guaranteed seat on Vanguard Executive Advisory Board. Bradley stopped breathing. The oxygen evacuated his lungs entirely and did not return. He stared at the number. $40 million. His mind, normally so agile, so practiced at spinning calculations, constructing false narratives, and identifying angles of exploitation, short-circuited completely beneath the crushing, astronomical weight of the figure. For 7 years, he had treated me like an irrelevant, invisible piece of furniture. He had mocked my comfortable work clothes. He had belittled the long hours I spent at the kitchen island. He had circulated, with evident pride, among his country club acquaintances, informing them with complete confidence that his wife was a pathetic, low-level data entry clerk who depended entirely on his supposed commercial real estate wealth. The truth arrived with the destructive force of something that has been building for a very long time and has finally found its release. I was not a data entry clerk. I had never been a data entry clerk. I was the founder, sole shareholder and chief executive of a technology company that had just been acquired for $40 million, built from nothing, in complete secrecy, while he was playing golf and pretending to close deals that existed only in his imagination. Bradley's eyes moved frantically around the ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the grand neoclassical columns of the historic building his mother had spent her lifetime using as a symbol of family supremacy. This building now belonged to me. The medical billing company belonged to me. $40 million in liquid capital and corporate stock belonged to me. And Bradley had nothing. He had walked into this marriage with nothing, performed wealth for 7 years on borrowed money and his wife's silence, signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement containing an infidelity clause he had never bothered to read, conducted a thoroughly documented affair on surveillance-equipped property, and forfeited, through his own choices and his own spectacular arrogance, any claim to what would have been a $20 million divorce settlement. He had traded half of a $40 million empire for a cubic zirconia engagement ring and $200,000 of fraudulent credit card debt attached to a woman who currently despised him and had fled the state. The sheer, unimaginable scale of the error physically broke him. Bradley's knees gave way entirely. His legs lost the ability to support his own body weight with the abruptness of something structural failing all at once. He collapsed downward, his expensive tailored trousers making contact with the polished hardwood of the service corridor floor. The two officers tightened their grips on his arms purely to prevent his face from striking the marble baseboard. He hung there between them, a sobbing, completely ruined man, kneeling in the dust of a commercial property that had once served as his family's ultimate status symbol, and now served as the most visible monument to his own catastrophic failure. Lexi, standing a few feet away, had also found the headline on a nearby reporter's screen. She read the number. She looked at Bradley kneeling on the floor in handcuffs. She looked up at the main stage where I stood. The full, astronomical magnitude of the wealth she had attempted to extort from me landed all at once. She had demanded $2 million from a woman who had just deposited $40 million into her bank account. Lexi turned on her designer heels and walked rapidly out through the service doors into the dark alley beyond, disappearing without a word, running as far and as fast as her situation could carry her. The elite crowd remaining in the ballroom turned their collective gaze back toward the stage. The disgust and condescending pity they had directed at me less than an hour ago had evaporated without a trace. What replaced it was something the ruthless world of high society finance reserves for very few people. Genuine, unqualified, slightly awed respect. In the hierarchy of capital, $40 million does not merely change a room's opinion. It rewrites the entire history of how a person was perceived. I was no longer the scorned, mocked, dismissed daughter-in-law. I was an apex predator who had been quietly, patiently circling for 7 years and had just executed the most legally pristine, financially devastating, and publicly spectacular corporate dismantling the city had ever had the privilege of witnessing. I descended the carpeted stairs of the main stage with the unhurried pace of someone who owns the building, the staircase, and every square foot of floor beneath them. The remaining crowd parted ahead of me, opening a wide, instinctive path without being asked. I walked directly to the service corridor where Bradley was still kneeling between the two officers. I stopped a few inches from his defeated, slumping figure. One of the officers held his position with the stillness of a professional who understands that some moments belong to the civilian in the room. Bradley raised his head slowly. His face was wet with tears and sweat, and the particular, hollow devastation of a man who was finally, irreversibly, run out of other people to blame. His eyes were wide and entirely unguarded, stripped of every layer of performance, every cultivated pose, every carefully maintained delusion, and they were searching my face for something I was not going to give him. I looked down at him. My expression contained no anger, no sadness, no vindication, nothing remotely warm, just the clean, cold, absolute finality of a door closing. Remember to collect your personal belongings and remove them from my property before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. 3 days had passed since the complete and total destruction of Cynthia's charity gala. The fallout had moved through the city's financial sector with the speed and thoroughness of something that had been building pressure for a long time and had finally found an exit. I was sitting in the expansive living room of my estate, inhabiting a quality of silence I had not experienced in 7 years. The custom Italian leather sofa that Bradley had chosen to use as the set of his own undoing had been hauled to the city dump the morning after the gala, replaced by a pristine white velvet sectional that occupied the center of the room with the easy authority of something chosen entirely for myself. A massive stone fireplace crackled with quiet, steady warmth, casting soft amber light across the polished hardwood floors. Outside, a relentless torrential rainstorm was working its way through the city. The wind pressed against the reinforced glass windows with force and persistence. Inside my estate, the temperature was precisely what I had set it to be. I held a steaming mug of artisanal chamomile tea between both hands and took a slow, deliberate sip. For the first time in 7 years, I was not reviewing bank statements to identify a mysterious overdraft. I was not managing the emotional weather of a fragile, performative ego. I was not calibrating my behavior to avoid triggering someone else's insecurity. I was simply existing, entirely, uncomplicatedly, in full possession of my own peace, inside a home I had built, in a life I had constructed, using resources that were entirely and irrevocably my own. The serene quiet of the evening was broken by a sharp, persistent buzzing from the digital security panel mounted in the marble wall. I set my mug down and walked to the monitor. The high-definition night vision perimeter cameras displayed a scene that managed to be, simultaneously, utterly pathetic and almost poetic in its symmetry. Standing outside my towering iron security gates was Bradley. He was unrecognizable as the arrogant, polished, self-proclaimed titan who had staged his humiliation of me in this very house on Thanksgiving evening. He was soaked to the bone, completely, thoroughly saturated, shivering with visible, uncontrollable intensity in the driving rain. He wore a cheap, thin windbreaker that offered no meaningful barrier against the cold. His hair was plastered flat to his forehead. His shoulders were collapsed inward in the universal posture of a person who has run out of everywhere else to go. He was pounding his bare fists against the solid iron bars of my gate with the specific, desperate energy of someone who has not yet accepted that a door has been closed permanently. I watched him for a long, quiet moment through the monitor. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not the faintest residual warmth. Simply the clear, settled absence of any remaining emotional debt. I pressed the intercom button and let my voice carry through the weatherproof speakers mounted on the stone pillars outside. "What do you want, Bradley?" He flinched at the sound of my voice. He lurched forward and pressed his wet face against the cold iron bars. "Olivia, please." His voice broke into something high and frantic. "You have to let me in. You have to talk to me. I have absolutely nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen. The motel discharged me because my last card declined. I am freezing out here. Please." "You should have considered your housing arrangements before you conducted a thoroughly documented affair on my furniture," I replied, my tone as flat and final as a signed document. "Your shelter situation is not my responsibility. Remove yourself from my property line before I contact the authorities." He dropped to his knees in the pooling mud. The water splashed against his cheap trousers as he gripped the iron bars with both hands, his knuckles white. "You do not understand," he cried, leaning into the particular, practiced cadence of his classic manipulation. the voice he used when all other strategies had failed. I was not in my right mind. My mother controlled everything. Cynthia poisoned every decision I made. She demanded I perform success for her social circle. She made me feel completely inadequate every day of my life. I was under so much pressure to be her perfect, successful son that I completely lost who I was. I am so sorry, Olivia. I am genuinely sorry. I released a short, entirely unsentimental laugh through the outdoor speakers. You are 35 years old, Bradley, I said, my voice cutting through the rain and his performance with equal ease. You chose to sign the predatory loan documents. You chose to purchase a luxury vehicle you could not afford on any income you have ever generated. You chose to bring a 24-year-old assistant into my home and conduct an affair on documented, time-stamped corporate security footage. Cynthia did not make those choices for you, and she certainly did not attempt to steal 50% of a $40 million company you did not even know existed. I paused. You are a grown man who is entirely and exclusively responsible for every single consequence currently standing outside my gate in the rain. Lexi meant nothing, he wailed, his forehead connecting with the iron bars. She was a mistake, a manipulation. She targeted my vulnerabilities. You are the only person I have ever genuinely loved. I swear it. We can fix this. Olivia, you have $40 million. We do not need to worry about any of this anymore. We can build the life we always deserved. Just open the gate. Let me come home. The audacity was, I had to admit, genuinely impressive in its durability. Even kneeling in freezing mud at the locked gate of a woman whose patience he had spent 7 years exhausting, his mind was still operating, still calculating, still searching for the angle, still trying to identify the pathway to my bank account. He was not mourning a marriage. He was mourning the termination of his financial arrangement. The life I dreamed of building never included a parasitic fraud as a co-architect, I said, allowing my voice to drop into a register that carried the complete and absolute weight of finality. I reached out and pressed a secondary button on the security console. A low mechanical whirring sound came through the exterior speakers, the automated delivery hatch at the base of the iron gate sliding open. Bradley looked down. A sudden, brief flash of something desperate and hopeful crossed his face. He was probably calculating whether what emerged might be cash, or a key to the guest house, or some softening of my position. The automated mechanism deposited a single medium-sized cardboard box onto the wet pavement outside the gate. It landed in a muddy puddle with a heavy, decisive thud. "What is this?" Bradley stammered, staring at the soggy cardboard with genuine confusion. "My security team swept the master suite for the final remnants of your personal property," I explained calmly through the intercom. "Inside that box is your complete collection of counterfeit Rolex watches, the fake luxury timepieces you wore to your elite country club meetings and commercial real estate presentations to convince everyone around you that you were a legitimate titan of industry." I let the silence hold for precisely 1 beat. "It is the single most accurate and complete representation of exactly who you are, Bradley. A cheap, hollow imitation of value designed to deceive people who were not paying close enough attention." Bradley stared at the box in the mud. His hands shook with a violence that had nothing to do with the cold. The last remaining facade, the last story he had been telling himself about who he was and what he was worth, dissolved completely in the rain. "Take your belongings and remove yourself from my property line," I said, delivering the final word with the clean, unequivocal authority of a woman who has been practicing it for years without knowing it. "You have 60 seconds to clear my perimeter before I dispatch the police and file formal charges for criminal trespassing. Do not present yourself at this address again." I released the intercom button, cutting off the desperate sound of his voice mid-syllable. I turned my back on the security monitor without ceremony, walked to my new white velvet sofa, and picked up my warm cup of tea. The storm raged against my windows. Inside my empire, the climate was exactly as I had designed it to be. 2 weeks after the spectacular, heavily publicized collapse of her fabricated empire, the bank finalized the foreclosure proceedings on Cynthia's suburban mansion. The eviction was executed with the brisk, impersonal efficiency of a legal process that has no interest in the feelings of the parties involved. Sheriff's deputies stood on her perfectly manicured front lawn, while a discount-moving crew worked through her remaining possessions, loading them into cheap cardboard boxes with the particular lack of care that comes from moving the belongings of someone who cannot afford better. Without the family trust fund, without Bradley's rent-free access to my finances, and without a single functional financial relationship remaining, Cynthia had no safety net of any kind. She was relocated, entirely against her preferences and entirely according to her means, to a damp, dilapidated apartment complex on the extreme outskirts of the city. The building carried a faint, persistent smell of stale cigarettes and mildew, a stark, daily, inescapable contrast to the lavender-scented hallways of her former country club life. Cynthia's toxic narcissism, it must be said, proved entirely impervious to material reality. She could be found strutting across the cracked concrete courtyard of the building in her last remaining silk scarves and oversized designer sunglasses, cornering her hard-working blue-collar neighbors at the communal mailboxes with the aggressive social energy of someone who has not yet received the message. She complained about the water pressure. She lamented, loudly and to anyone who had not yet learned to walk the long way around, the horrific absence of valet parking. She circulated a transparent, entirely unconvincing story among her new neighbors. She was merely renting the unit on a temporary basis, she explained, while her primary estate underwent a multi-million-dollar architectural renovation. Her new neighbors, who had seen everything, rolled their eyes and walked away. I decided, not from any impulse toward pity or reconciliation, but for the satisfaction of tying off one final, precise loose end to pay her a personal visit. I did not take the Maybach. I wanted something that communicated the specific register of wealth she would find most devastating. Not inherited, not borrowed, not performed. I slid into the driver's seat of my custom-ordered Aston Martin. The sleek silver machine roared to life in my garage, its twin-turbo engine reverberating off the walls with a sound that was simultaneously refined and entirely unapologetic. I drove out to the suburban periphery where Cynthia was currently residing. The moment the gleaming, low-profile sports car turned into the pothole-riddled parking lot of the apartment complex, it produced the kind of immediate, involuntary attention that only truly exceptional machinery commands. People looked out from behind cheap plastic blinds. Children paused on cracked sidewalks. I parked the car directly in front of Cynthia's ground-floor unit, ensuring the deep, authoritative purr of the engine had adequate time to rattle her single-pane windows before I cut the ignition. Cynthia was standing on her tiny, rusted metal balcony, holding a chipped ceramic mug. I watched through the tinted windshield as recognition crossed her face the exact second I stepped out of the car. And then I watched something extraordinary happen. Instead of retreating, instead of assessing her situation with any contact with reality, instead of doing anything that a person in full possession of accurate information would do, her delusional mind constructed in real time a wildly inaccurate and entirely self-serving narrative. She set down the mug. She practically moved toward the parking lot at something approaching a sprint. She adjusted her silk scarf. Her face underwent a rapid, practiced transformation from surprise to smugness, the specific, infuriating expression of a woman who has decided, without evidence, that she has just won something. In the deeply fractured architecture of her reality, my arrival in a multi-million-dollar sports car could mean only one thing. The guilt had finally overwhelmed me. The establishment had rejected my new money. I had come to her, to this parking lot, to this damp apartment complex, to beg for her maternal forgiveness and negotiate my re-entry into her good graces. She fully expected me to produce the deed to the historic commercial building and place it in her hands as a peace offering. I leaned back against the polished silver hood of the Aston Martin, wearing a sharp-tailored white blazer and designer sunglasses, and waited for her to reach me. Cynthia marched up, puffed out her chest, and prepared to accept my surrender. "I knew you would eventually come to your senses, Olivia," she announced, her voice dripping with the specific, unearned condescension of someone who believes the world has just corrected itself on her behalf. "The guilt must be absolutely consuming you. You have realized, finally, that you cannot navigate high society without my guidance and the legitimacy of this family's name. I can find it in my heart to extend my forgiveness, provided you brought the commercial property deed and the keys to my historic building. Hand them over, and we can agree to put this entire ugly misunderstanding behind us permanently." I did not laugh. I did not smile. I looked at her with the steady, complete, entirely clinical detachment of someone examining something they once found distressing and now simply find instructive. I reached into the interior pocket of my white blazer and produced a crisp, heavy, legally bound envelope. Cynthia's eyes locked onto it with immediate, greedy focus. She reached toward it with one trembling, eager hand, already organizing in her mind the moment she would reclaim her building, her social position, and her constructed identity. I placed the envelope firmly in her outstretched hand. "You may want to review the contents before you start planning your return to the country club circuit," I said, my voice as cold and level as a surveyor's instrument. Cynthia ripped the envelope open with barely controlled impatience. Her eyes swept the top document. The triumphant smile slid off her face with the completeness and speed of something that was never structurally sound to begin with. It was replaced by an expression of genuine, soul-crushing horror. It was not a property deed. It was a commercial invoice. "This is an itemized bill for professional heavy-duty hazard cleaning and full industrial waste removal services," I said, ensuring that every neighbor who had gradually positioned themselves within earshot could hear every word clearly. "When my company formally took possession of your historic building following the foreclosure, we discovered that you had vacated the grand ballroom in a state of complete ruin. Broken crystal, abandoned catering equipment, months of unpaid utility notices, and substantial structural cleaning requirements were left distributed across my property. That invoice is for $32,000. My legal team has already filed the appropriate civil claim to garnish whatever income you are able to generate until the debt is satisfied in full." Cynthia's hands shook so violently that the invoice fluttered from her fingers and landed face up on the wet pavement. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her voice fracturing into the desperate, cracking register of someone who has finally, genuinely run out of moves. "I am your family. You are a monster." I removed my designer sunglasses slowly. I looked at her. At the broken, bankrupt, fundamentally unchanged woman who had tormented me with casual, sustained cruelty for 7 consecutive years, and I felt the clean, certain absence of anything resembling guilt. "I am exactly what you spent 7 years building, Cynthia," I said. "This is the cleaning bill for the mess you left at my commercial building." I put my sunglasses back on. "You told me once, in front of an audience, that I had no place in this family. You were right. My place has always been at the top, looking directly down at you." Cynthia's scream followed me across the parking lot and out into the city air as I lowered myself gracefully into the driver's seat of the Aston Martin, started the engine, and drove away, without once consulting the rearview mirror. The commercial real estate industry is a small, tightly networked community built on reputation, trust, and the kind of professional credibility that, once destroyed, does not regenerate. When the high-definition footage of Bradley being arrested on the stage of his mother's foreclosed building circulated through the city's financial district, and it circulated extensively, within hours, with the enthusiastic assistance of the society reporters Cynthia had personally hired to document her triumph, his professional existence ended immediately and completely. He was blacklisted by every brokerage firm, investment agency, and corporate office in the state, with a speed that reflected both the severity of his conduct and the genuine relief of an industry glad to be rid of him. No legitimate entity would employ a disgraced, extensively publicized fraudster who had attempted to legally seize a $40 million medical software company through a divorce proceeding based on deliberate lies. Stripped of his custom suits, his leased vehicles, his borrowed social access, and the entire constructed persona he had inhabited for his adult life, Bradley was delivered without ceremony into the unforgiving reality of the entry-level labor market. He now stood beneath the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of a discount big-box electronics retailer, wearing a scratchy, bright blue polyester polo shirt with a cheap plastic name tag pinned unevenly to his chest. He hauled flat-screen televisions into the trunks of minivans for impatient customers who yelled at him about expired coupon codes. He was reprimanded by his store manager for failing to hit his extended protection plan sales targets on budget blenders. The man who had once bragged, with complete sincerity, about closing multi-million-dollar commercial real estate transactions was now being coached on how to upsell surge protectors. But the physical labor and the daily, grinding indignity of customer-facing retail were not his primary torment. The true punishment arrived every other Friday when his store manager handed him his printed pay stub. Bradley stared at the heavily redacted figures on the cheap paper with the expression of a man who has not yet adapted to what his life has become. A legally mandated wage garnishment consumed 70% of his net earnings before the remainder reached his severely overdrawn account. The relentless, mechanical consequence of the credit card debt he had fraudulently opened in Lexi's name now being serviced, in her complete absence, entirely by him. Lexi had vanished in the middle of the night, leaving the state with whatever she could carry, abandoning the repossessed Porsche and leaving Bradley as the sole legally accessible target for the aggressive collection agencies pursuing the debt. He was sweeping retail floors and selling discount charging cables to slowly, incrementally pay off a luxury sports car he no longer possessed, chained to a financial disaster created by a woman who had last been seen running away from him in the dark. Miles away from the electronics store, Cynthia was inhabiting her own custom-designed version of sustained daily accountability. Without the protective infrastructure of the family trust fund, without Bradley's borrowed access to my finances, and without the social armor her fabricated wealth had always provided, she was forced, for the first time in 4 uninterrupted decades, to seek actual paid employment in order to cover the cost of basic groceries and her damp apartment's monthly rent. She stood behind the checkout counter of a high-end organic grocery store located at the precise center of her former affluent suburban neighborhood. The universe has, I have come to believe, a genuine and rather sophisticated sense of humor. Cynthia wore a shapeless dark green apron over cheap, heavily stained uniform pants. Her hands, once adorned with expensive diamond rings and freshly maintained manicures, the hands she had pointed and gestured with at me across so many rooms, were now dry, calloused, and cracked from hours of handling barcode scanners, bagging raw produce, and pushing disinfected shopping carts across asphalt parking lots. She was staring at the moving black conveyor belt, dreading the opening of the automatic sliding doors, when 2 impeccably dressed women pushed their fully loaded shopping carts into her checkout lane. Imported truffles, expensive organic wines, artisan cheeses. The quiet, effortless consumption of people for whom this is simply Tuesday. Cynthia's stomach descended. They were senior board members of the Oakwood Country Club. The precise social peers who had once sipped her stolen vintage champagne and listened with eager, credulous attention to her fabricated stories about my character and my supposed crimes. They did not look away out of grace or social discomfort. They stared at Cynthia with the particular, unhurried amusement of women who have witnessed a dramatic reversal of fortune and have absolutely no incentive to pretend otherwise. They placed their items on the belt, exchanging loud, carefully calculated whispers about the tragic trajectory of the woman scanning their groceries. They mentioned the police raid. They mentioned Bradley's electronics store employment with the specific delight of people who have been waiting for this information. Cynthia's hands shook visibly as she bagged an expensive bottle of imported olive oil. Her teenage shift manager, 19 years old, carrying a clipboard, snapped at her from across the registers with the impatient, entirely unsentimental authority of someone who needs the premium checkout lane to keep moving. Cynthia swallowed every ounce of her monumental lifelong pride. She forced a painfully humiliating smile. She handed the receipt to the women who had just spent her entire monthly salary on a casual afternoon's grocery run and said nothing. This was not an isolated incident. It was her Tuesday, her Wednesday, her every working day. A sustained, highly localized, entirely deserved public accountability that she was required to show up for, on schedule, wearing a green apron. The consequences of their choices stretched out ahead of them with no visible horizon. A lifetime sentence of grinding labor, compounding debt, and the particular, inescapable social exile that comes from being exposed as a fraud in front of the only audience that ever mattered to them. I did not need to monitor their daily reality. I simply felt, in the clean air of my own life, the profound and permanent shift of having a toxic, compounding infection removed, and the extraordinary vitality that fills the space it once occupied. The harsh storms eventually exhausted themselves. A brilliant, unseasonably warm weekend afternoon arrived without announcement, filling every room of my estate with the particular quality of light that makes everything look as though it has been cleaned from the inside. I stood in my sun-filled chef's kitchen, slicing fresh organic fruit on a heavy marble cutting board. The expansive glass doors opening onto the manicured gardens were pushed wide open, letting a gentle breeze carry the scent of blooming jasmine through the house in long, unhurried waves. There was no screaming, no aggressive, entitled financial demands, no fragile, manufactured ego requiring constant maintenance and emotional subsidy, no performance being demanded of me, no version of myself being suppressed or managed or made smaller for someone else's comfort. There was only the clean, absolute, completely undiluted fact of peace. The soft chime of the front gate intercom moved through the quiet house. I tapped the security monitor built into the kitchen island. A sleek, understated luxury sedan was parked on the circular drive. The driver's window rolled down, and Terrence's sharp, warm, entirely trustworthy face appeared. He smiled at the camera and gave a quick, familiar wave. In the passenger seat beside him, looking more radiant and genuinely, deeply relaxed than I had ever seen her, her hands resting serenely on a beautifully visible, growing baby bump, was Monica. I pressed the silver button to open the iron gates and felt a smile spread across my face that required no effort at all. The toxic biological ties had been severed completely and permanently. But the people who had chosen, under real pressure and real cost, to stand beside me, the true allies who had walked through the fire rather than away from it, were pulling into my driveway to celebrate the beginning of something new. Exactly 1 year has passed since that Thanksgiving evening. I am standing on the sprawling private wraparound balcony of my new corporate headquarters. The crisp, electric air of Manhattan moves against my tailored designer coat with the specific energy of a city that never requires permission and never apologizes for its ambitions. I look out over the glittering, infinite skyline. The financial district pulses hundreds of feet below me. Its lights, its density, its relentless forward momentum. A constant, beautiful confirmation of the scale of the world I now occupy, without apology and without condition. The transition from a suffocating suburban marriage to the pinnacle of global commerce was swift in retrospect. But it was not luck, and it was not sudden. Every single element of it was earned. The $40 million Vanguard acquisition was never the destination. It was the seed capital for a far larger and more intentional vision. I took a substantial strategic portion of the buyout proceeds and established an elite angel investment fund with a mission that is entirely specific and entirely unapologetic. I find, mentor, and fund brilliant female entrepreneurs who are quietly building revolutionary technology companies in stealth mode, invisible to the arrogant traditional investors who assume that a woman in comfortable clothes, working long hours at a kitchen table, is probably a data entry clerk. I sit at the head of a mahogany boardroom table in my own building, and I listen to extraordinary women pitch their companies. And then I write them seven-figure checks to transform their relentless, solitary, underestimated work into undeniable, permanent reality. I am building an army of financially independent, completely untouchable female executives who will never need to rely on a fraudulent performance of wealth for a single day of their lives. The heavy, soundproofed glass door of my office terrace slides open. I turn around. Terrence and Monica step into the afternoon sunlight. They flew in this morning for a weekend visit, and the transformation in both of them, in the quality of their presence, in the ease they carry, is something that moves me every time I see it. Terrence is no longer the brilliant forensic accountant working under someone else's corporate umbrella, quietly extending patience he should never have been required to extend. Using a substantial confidential seed investment I provided, combined with sustained mentorship, he launched his own elite forensic accounting firm in the heart of the city. He runs a highly lucrative practice specializing in auditing commercial real estate enterprises, actively hunting down and legally dismantling the arrogant brokers who attempt to commit the same categories of financial fraud that my ex-husband once treated as a lifestyle. He built an empire of accountability. His professional reputation is entirely sterling, but the most luminous transformation belongs to Monica. She stands beside her husband, her hands resting gently on a beautifully round baby bump. Third trimester. Glowing with the specific, settled, unshakable peace of a person who has made the right decision and knows it in their bones. There is no anxiety in her eyes, no residual fear, no anticipatory tension waiting for the next emergency call, demanding money for a bounced check or a fabricated crisis. On the day her mother was evicted from the historic building, Monica permanently changed her phone number, deleted her old social media accounts, and severed every remaining connection to the toxic bloodline that had defined her life. She legally and emotionally emancipated herself from the crushing inheritance of her family's dysfunction. She is bringing her child into a world built on authentic love, financial transparency, and the kind of emotional safety that does not require constant vigilance to maintain. She broke the generational curse. She did it by simply walking away from the burning wreckage with her head up and never once looking back. We spend the afternoon together in the way that people spend afternoons when the weight of toxic obligation has been permanently removed, easily, warmly, without performance or agenda. We talk about Terrence's upcoming audits. We talk about the nursery Monica has been designing with the focused, joyful attention of someone decorating a room for the first person in their family who will grow up in safety. There is no gossip, no financial crisis management, no emotional labor disguised as conversation. Three successful, grounded adults, enjoying the life they actively chose to build, in the company of people who earned their place in it. When the sun begins its descent behind the steel towers, painting the Hudson in brilliant gold and deep orange, Terence and Monica excuse themselves for the evening. I remain alone on the balcony. The city lights begin their nightly revelation, illuminating the architecture below one building at a time. I walk to the small outdoor bar and pour a single generous measure of vintage champagne into a heavy crystal flute. The sparkling liquid catches the ambient glow of the skyline. This champagne was not purchased with stolen equity. It was not charged to a credit card belonging to someone who could not afford it. It was not poured to maintain an illusion or impress an audience. This is the taste of something that was built from nothing, defended under pressure, and ultimately realized in full. I step to the thick glass railing and look down at the millions of people moving through the streets below. The endless, churning, magnificent human business of a city that does not stop. I take a slow sip. The silence surrounding me is not lonely. It is the most powerful, clarifying, deeply earned quiet I have ever known. I look at the horizon, my mind perfectly still, my heart entirely free of the weight I carried for 7 years. I do not spend time thinking about Bradley in his polyester polo, or Cynthia behind her checkout counter, or Lexi wherever she landed. I do not need their suffering to feel the fullness of what I have built. I simply stopped paying for their illusions and let them collapse under their own weight. The sweetest revenge was never destruction. It was this, the brilliant, untouchable, completely self-authored life they will never have access to and never understand. I raise my crystal glass one final time, a quiet, private, entirely sincere toast to the version of myself who kept working in silence, who never corrected the record, who trusted the process completely, and take the last sip. I turn my back on the horizon. I walk back inside my empire. The heavy glass doors slide shut behind me, sealing the world I built. Perfectly, completely, and entirely on my own terms, inside. The most enduring lesson in all of this is not about revenge. It is about the extraordinary, compounding, life-altering power of silent resilience and complete financial independence. We are conditioned by culture, by family, by the accumulated weight of other people's opinions to believe that when we are attacked, dismissed, or betrayed by those who were supposed to be on our side, we must defend ourselves loudly. We are taught that we must prove our worth in the room where the insult was delivered, on the terms set by the people who delivered it. But genuine power does not operate on that logic. When you are surrounded by people who have built their identities on fabricated wealth, borrowed authority, and the deliberate suppression of those around them, engaging with their chaos does not defeat them. It feeds them. The ultimate victory is found somewhere else entirely. In the quiet, relentless, uninterrupted work of building something real while they are fully occupied underestimating you. Financial independence is not a luxury. It is armor. It is the most complete and permanent protection available against manipulation, control, and the particular cruelty of people who believe your dependency on them gives them the right to define you. When you control your own resources, you control your own story. You remove, permanently and without drama, the most effective weapon in an abuser's arsenal. And this, you do not need to destroy toxic people to be free of them. You simply need to stop subsidizing their delusions. When you withdraw your financial support, your emotional labor, and your patient, silent maintenance of their fictions, they collapse under the weight of their own choices with a speed and totality that no external force could ever achieve. Healing does not always require forgiveness. It does not require reconciliation. Sometimes it requires nothing more, and nothing less, than recognizing your own worth with absolute clarity, drawing boundaries that do not move, and walking forward into a reality they will never have the privilege of touching. The trash, when you stop holding it up, takes itself out. And you rise.